Good morning, everybody. Jason here from AV Pro Edge and Meridio. Happy Monday. I hope everybody had a great, refreshing weekend. It is Monday, so that means I am back with Anthony Grimani doing some really cool, in-depth, deep dive audio conversations. How you doing, Anthony?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
Good. I'm great. I'm great. So to catch everybody up to speed, we spent last Monday talking about speaker placement, whether it's two-channel or surround sound. We were talking about room design and things like that. And the follow-up to that will be part 2 today on speaker placement, where we're going to get into what do you do exactly if you're trying to put a surround system or even a two-channel system in a room that might not be an ideal shape or size, or maybe there's certain furniture that's in the way. So we want to go over some tips and tricks with you guys out there who might be working in these sort of difficult type environments. So as we're talking with Anthony today, guys, feel free, type in any questions you may have into the question box. I'll be able to field those questions kind of as we go along through the presentation today, and then we'll have some time at the end too, in case there's any questions we couldn't get to during the presentation. So that being said, Anthony, I think you've got some slides to show us, and we're really looking forward to this talk. I really feel like this part of the conversation is going to be very much more real world to a lot of integrators out there who don't always have the luxury of having an ideal room. And this might be something that you've probably done many times in the past. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what do you do when you have a difficult room to work with?
Right. Well, hi, everybody. And just again, a big shout out to the fine folks at AV Pro Edge for putting this together. I just want to remind everybody that what AV Pro sells is these amazing boxes that make HDMI work all the time. And they don't make anything that they're trying to sell you for designing, installing the audio of these rooms. They're doing this out of the goodness of their heart and to help out the industry. And big virtual applause. If everybody was in the room, you'd get a big round of applause for AV Pro.
And thank you to Anthony. I know I know this is a lot of time to put these things together and things like that. So thank you as well. And I'm glad we've linked up, and you've got me kind of reinvigorated playing with my a.k.a. kit and some microphones and things like that. So thank you, man. I'm really enjoying these sessions we're having together.
Hey, you're welcome. You're welcome. What else would I be doing? Cleaning my attic, cleaning my basement,
Exactly.
Buffing the wheels of my bicycle one more time? No.
Yeah.
So last week we got into this thing about speaker placement, and about an hour and a half into just the basic conversations around all of the science and all of the technique issues of speaker placement. I was like, okay, this is going to take 2 weeks. I know we want to get into the business of like, what do I do when I have a room that's L-shaped or a room that has no left wall or has glass everywhere around. We want to do that. Before going there, I still want to spend a little time about the ideals. What if all things were absolutely ideal, which is a rectangular room of the right ratios, where do we and why do we put speakers in certain places? And then we'll get it, with that knowledge base, we'll get into how we deal with these odd rooms, okay?
Sure.
So if we can go over to the slide deck, and let's see here. Yep, all right, so you can see the slide deck, right?
Yeah, I can see the slide deck, and for you guys who are watching the webinar, there is a slider bar in between mine and Anthony's camera and his screen that he's sharing. And if you guys have a hard time seeing that screen that he's sharing, feel free, grab that slider bar. You can move it up and down and make that screen a little bit bigger if you need to. So feel free to go ahead and do that.
Right, and also if you're watching this on a smartphone, like I'm seeing this on my iPhone, you can slide back and forth between the slide deck and the cameras. I'd recommend sticking with a slide deck instead of watching my goofy face. It'll be more interesting. So speaker placement part 2. So as a reminder from last time, this is the speaker placement guideline under idealized conditions, which is a rectangular room where you don't really have any interferences. Notice that on this diagram, there's no windows, there's no doors, there's no fireplaces. There's nothing in the way, which is a completely ideal condition, and that's where I want to start. So as a reminder, in a room like this, you start off with the left and right speakers wanting to form a 45-degree angle to your seating position. And you want to put those speakers at a place where their interaction with the room is less screwed up. And those can be two contradicting requirements. You want to start with the center speaker being at the same height as the left and right, which then begs the question, like, what do I do if I have a big fixed pixel display that's not a projection system with an acoustically transparent screen? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Oh, actually, we did last time, and I think we're going to do a whole session on some finessing of that. You can put the speakers at the same distance or on a straight line. They don't have to form an arc like they used to many years ago. You're going to put the surround speakers, the side surround speakers, to the sides and slightly behind your seating position at about 100 degrees. You're going to put those famous new wide channel speakers that are part of the immersive audio standards today. You're going to put this at 45 degrees from your seating position. To be clear, this first 45 degrees is the total angle formed between left and right speaker in your seating position. That means that the half angle relative to front center is 22.5. And if you want to think of it that way, just relative to like straight north, the left speaker is 22 degrees to the left, and the wide channel is 45 degrees to the left. I'll show you a quick animation of that. The back speakers want to be basically all the way close to behind you at 165 degrees, where 180 would be right directly behind the middle of your head. 165 is a little to the left, 160 minus 165 is a little more to your right. The total angle between the two would be 30 degrees. And then we're about to get into a lot of this. You really should do 4 subwoofers in the 4 corners of the room, and I'll explain why, how, and what's so cool about that. So now we also talked about the seating position and places where there are standing waves and not standing waves, and a good guideline is to put the seat at about 0.68 of the length of the room. There was a question in the question set from last week. And by the way, I have answered all those questions, and I realized just before the seminar that I never hit send on the email for all the questions. So all you guys who are waiting for your answers, sorry, I spaced out.
And that's okay, guys, because what I've been doing, because there have been so many great questions during these presentations, I'm actually kind of taking all of the questions and with Anthony's answers and putting those on the Meridio forums, just so everybody has a chance to see all the questions, because there were some excellent questions in that collection there. So Anthony, thanks again for taking the time to answer those questions. But guys, feel free, check the Meridio forums, and you'll see the Q&A from the last session, and after this session, we'll do a Q&A again for this session and keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, there were some really good questions, by the way, and I love nothing more when I'm teaching classes for a question to come along that is actually answered in the very next slide.
That's the best, isn't it?
That means the class is going well. Everybody's following. They're like, but what about? Oh, great! I'm glad you asked. Boom.
Yeah.
Wait, there's more. So somebody did ask to clarify this thing when I'm talking about the length of the room and the depth of the room. By the way, people sometimes use the word depth. That confuses me, because some people could think that that's the height.
Right.
Some people think that it's the distance from front to back. Very simply, I call the front to back distance the length of the room.
Right.
I call the distance between the left and right wall the width of the room. Sure. And I call the distance between the floor and the ceiling the height of the room. And so I'm not going deep. I'm just going long, wide, and height and tall.
Right.
So
good.
A good position as a start point for putting seats, which is actually the basis for all of these speaker positions, is about 0.68 of the length of the room, which is from the front wall, not from the speakers, not from the screen, not from any other marker in the room, but actually the wall, because that's where the base standing waves go back and forth from. So we're going to put our seats at 0.68 as a good start point if you can. You're going to put the screen in front of the speakers if you can actually work with an acoustically transparent screen and projection, which is still, in my view, from a cinematic point of view, is still the best. Yes, fixed pixel displays, there's all kinds of technologies out there that can produce a really amazing picture on their own, but for cinematic presentation, for the sense of actually experiencing what the director intended, there's 2 things that are great about acoustically transparent screens. One is that you can actually put all 3 speakers behind the screen where they deserve to be. So the sound is exactly where the director intended for it to be, and the sound designer and the mixer, whoever was in charge of it. Number 1. Number 2, and this is way more subjective. I feel, this is just me, I feel that the experience of having the picture come off a reflected surface, what's called in video a Lambertian reflected surface, something that's really nice and even with a really continuous and a very even lighting, no vignetting, nothing odd, is more believable in terms of the cinematic experience that what comes off the equivalent big screen TV. There's something about, just for me and people I've talked to, about the sense of what the picture is like when it comes off a big plastic thing, even if it's glass in front, versus reflected off from a projector. Some of that may just be habit of watching projected images in cinemas for years, maybe. By the same token, you know, the 24 frame staccato, the judder that's there, we've gotten so used to it that when it's disappeared, you're like, whoa,
what's going on? Yeah, this looks weird.
Something's wrong. And yes, it's smoother when you're at 60 frames and it's even, but it just is different. So that's it. I just wanted to say that there's a lot of benefits at an acoustically transparent screen. So the screen is going to be 0.9 of the distance between the seating and the screen, which corresponds to about a 50-degree angle. There were a few questions from last week that said, well, what if I have 3 rows of seating? Where do I base that on? And the answer is, well, it depends. If there's a designated main seat, if in talking with a client, you've said row 2 in the middle is the sometimes known as the captain's seat, or in more vulgar terms, the money seat. The money seat, yeah. Then you make that the 50-degree angle. If there is no definition, then you take an average, you know, where you say, look, my 3 rows of seating are between here and here, and I'm going to make a 50-degree right in the middle. What's actually more important with that is actually not to make the picture too big. If at the front row the picture ends up being more than 65 or 70 degrees, you start to see pixels. You also start to be doing this during a movie, and it's just a little unnerving. It can give you nausea.
Then if there's anything in the video that's undesirable, like some noise or some color banding, if you're sitting real close like that, you can just see it even better. Or worse, however you want to say it.
You start to notice that what happens is in the middle of a movie, suddenly your eye brain goes, what was that? That's not natural. That's not like I'm in the story, and it pulls you out of the story. You're back in your seat. You're not running around with James Bond saving the world from bad guys. You're yourself, you know, worrying about the things you worry about, which is not what we want in a movie. Okay, so 45 degrees subtended angle between left and right speakers is the target. About 100 degrees to the side left speaker, about 45 degrees to the wide left speaker, wide left and right, and about 165 degrees, click. Okay, so 165 degrees to where those back channels are, which again is a little closer than most people expect. If you place those speakers wider, the image is not going to be as clearly behind it. It can actually create an inversion where the sounds that are supposed to come from behind you start to come from the front. So, and then again, as a summary of what we've talked about so far, the top speakers really should be at a midpoint between the left and center and the center and right, as I've shown them here. I'm showing 4 top speakers in a room that's rectanguloid, and the front pair should be 20 to 30 degrees forward. The back pair should be about 20 to 30 degrees back. In a larger room, you can actually end up with 3 pairs, which I should draw here, but the third set would be kind of directly over your head or slightly forward of that. And in smaller rooms, it is actually better to just have 1 pair in front of you. You try to cram too many speakers on the ceiling, what you end up with is a giant mush of reflected sound energy up there. It just gets really confusing.
That's exactly what I'm dealing with at home myself. I just don't have the physical room to do 4 in the ceiling. So I'd much rather just do 1 pair then.
Yeah, 1 pair. And most film mixers are going to be using, if you actually could put up 3 pairs, and you could actually listen to the sounds at those 3 pairs, you'd find that most of the energy is in the front pair.
Got it.
Less in the middle pair, and almost nothing in the back, because a film mixer, unless there's a spot effect where you want something very specific and very rarely to come from back there, which is really rare in a movie. The majority of the time, what a film mixer is going to do is want to fill in the sound field between the front and up and over a little bit and into the surrounds, and that usually ends up being that pair that's in front. I mentioned last time that I spent a good long hour talking to Gary Rizzo, well-known film mixer who did a lot of early Atmos mixes, and that's what he said. It's like, you know, most of the time, the screen is still where most of the sound comes from, and I'm going to fill in a little bit to the edges of the screen with the wide channels, and I'm going to fill in a little bit above the screen with the front set of top speakers, and then beyond that, it's really rare for there to be much sound.
Real quick, Anthony, just to clarify, a question comes in from Jordan. He says, just to clarify terminology, what you're referring to is side left and side right, or what typically will be labeled as surround left and surround right on an AVR. That's his question.
Yeah, and in an early slide at the beginning of last week, I said, let's agree to a new terminology. Surround is what it has been called in the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And surround really, if we want to think of it, is everything that's not front. It's, you know,
Right.
it's the wides, it's the sides, it's the backs, it's the tops. All of that is surround. So I'm throwing away that word in terms of specificity, and I'm now wanting to call that speaker that's to your left side, side left, side right, back left, top. All of that forms the surround sound field, as opposed to the sound field coming from the front, which is sometimes known as the screen sound. So yeah, that's a long way to answer. Yes, that is what used to be called the surround left and surround right in old AVRs, and it's still called that actually on a lot of silk screens.
Oh, sure.
And then you end up being like, well, I'm not really sure. What does this mean? The side, left, right, top, surround? I don't know. All right. One thing I forgot to mention in terms of the top speakers, stuff that's on the ceiling. I often see speakers that are pointed, that are regular in-ceiling speakers pointed down at the floor. And when you're 20 to 30 degrees back from those, you're going to be losing some mids and highs because speakers have a certain amount of high frequency directivity, and you really do want to aim those towards the seating location. Okay.
Excellent.
So the speakers you choose should either already have an angle in them. There's a bunch of companies that do that, or have adjustable mid-ranges and tweeters so you can actually tilt them back. Or if you know that they have a wide enough dispersion to cover, then you can use those.
Great.
All right. Jason, are you seeing me? Okay, I'm noticing a fair amount of jitter in the picture over here, but if you're all good with what you're seeing on your side,
you're good on our end. No big deal. You're fine.
Excellent. Okay. So before we get into odd room placement, I wanted to finish the conversation of where do we put all these speakers, both from an absolute theory point of view, an ideal placement point of view, and then we can put all of that aside and go, okay, well, what does the real world really bring to us? So placement of subwoofers. Before talking about placement of subwoofers, there's a little background info that's needed, which is to talk again about standing waves. So we've already done this a few times, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, just as a reminder. Standing waves occur naturally in any room, in any instrument, and in organ pipe, anywhere where there's waves that are bound by reflection points. Those standing waves are really resonances that cause uneven frequency response in different places of the room. They result in poor bass impact, either because you're missing bass at certain frequencies, or because at locations where you're not missing bass, the bass that's there could be resonant, which means it could have a rise time in the resonance, take a while to go up to level, and that it could hang for a second or two. So rather than have a bass impact that's quick and tight during a movie or during music, it just goes blah, and blah is not good sound. So you can end up with different bass at every seat, and that could be to the tune of 20 or 25 dB difference at certain frequencies when you just move one seat to the left, or one seat to the right, or one seat behind. And generally, you have to worry about the region of frequencies between 30 and 150 hertz. So this is a condition where there could be a standing wave when the wave put into the room is the same dimension as the room from front to back, or left to right, or top to bottom. It can also happen when a wave is twice as long as the room, which means that the room is half the size of the wave, or when the room is where you can fit 1.5 waves in the room, or 2 or 2.5. It's all in increments of a half wave. So here's how they form. Here's how a standing wave forms. And I like to talk first about a three-sided room that doesn't have a back wall, and a subwoofer at the front is launching a wave. And if you look at it in time, in a kind of in a history from front to back of the room, a wave that had started actually at a low point a while back has moved over this way, and the subwoofer has now changed from a low level to a high level, as in the cone has moved from back to forward from its rest position, and the wave has propagated in the room this way. If there's no wall back here, the wave just goes out of the room and continues. There's no standing wave, there's no reflection. Now you close the wall, imagine you had a room with like a giant metal door on the whole back, and now you can close it. That wave is going to bounce back. So what? It bounces back. The reflected sound happens everywhere. Well, the issue is that At different points in time, this pressure over here on one side of the room changes from positive to neutral to negative, which is the subwoofer or the woofers pushing and pulling air, and it propagates down and bounces back at a different place. That woofer is not quite as far out in the room. It propagates and bounces back. At a different place, the woofer is all the way inside the cabinet, and it propagates that around, and it bounces back and forth. And if you look over here, there's an excursion. There's a change of pressure at different conditions. Over here, there's a change of pressure. The way we hear is that the pressure near our ear canal changes over time, and that creates a sensation of sound. Okay, it's not, I was going to say it's not much more complicated than that. It's actually a really complicated process,
Yeah.
but you can simplify it down as, hey, if the pressure changes by our ear canal, our brain goes, hey, there's a sonic event going on here, as long as it's within a certain range of frequencies from about 30 hertz to, depending on how old you are, 10 kilohertz or 18 kilohertz or 6 kilohertz, depending on how old you are. Now, it's often thought that we hear sound down to 20 hertz, and most people would agree that you actually hear the sound down to about 30. Sensation is there, but it's more of a vibration.
Right.
So what's interesting about this diagram is here you see lines that go up and down, and here the lines go up and down less. And then they go to a point where there's this knot here. There's what's called a node. And at this point, as the waves go back and forth, over time, there's no sensation of change of pressure with time. So while there would be loud bass over here and loud bass over here, there's nothing over here. So at the particular frequency that would correspond to this wave being twice as long as the room, there would be no audible sound in the middle of the room. And by no audible, I mean that it could actually be 25 or 30 or 40 dB quieter here than it is at the front or back wall. And 40 dB quieter is losing 99% of the sound energy just in a linear scale. So if you take the same room and you change to a higher frequency, a shorter wavelength, and where the sound without the room would have gone out, and you close the wall, this is where the sound bounces back, and you can kind of extrapolate that over time you won't end up with a standing wave here because it doesn't overlap quite so well. So all rooms will have standing waves. The residences are set. There can be an overlap. So imagine a room in which, and no, I'm not drawing swastikas over here, I'm drawing sound waves. The length and width of the room, if they're the same, you're going to end up with a resonance at the same frequencies from the front to back and left to right, and that can cause problems. If you actually built a cube of a room, the resonances from front to back and left to right and top to bottom would be the same, so you end up with a triple whammy of that effect. So you can calculate the theoretical standing waves as long as the walls are stiff, which would be heavy concrete or lots of layers of sheetrock. And here's the equation in both the imperial and metric system. And really, ultimately, what you want to do is to start off in designing a room to make sure that the size doesn't propagate standing waves that are the same frequencies between the front, back, the left, right, and the top, bottom. Here's an example of a bad room, a room that's 8 by 16 by 20. There is a place, not at the basic, not at the fundamental frequency, but at twice the frequency of the length, you're going to have a standing wave on the width. And so these things are all dividable by each other. These are not. This room will have less problems than that room, and all you have to do is to do that calculation of the standing waves from the equation before and compare all the frequencies up to 4 times the fundamental. So here's an example again of what could happen in a room that's about 20 feet long, which is 6 meters. If you had a standing wave, if you were playing about 50 hertz in the room, you would end up, 50 hertz would fill the room, it would reflect back, and there would be a null at a quarter of the room and a null at 3/4 of the room, or a quarter if you take it from the front, there'd be a null here, a peak there, and a null there. And if the room was actually 20 feet by 10 feet, which is a 2-to-1 ratio, you'd also end up with a null in the other direction at the same frequency. That would be a first harmonic, that would be a second harmonic, doesn't really matter. At the seat position over here, you end up with a double whammy. Don't do it. Don't have a room that's 6 meters by 3 meters or 20 feet by 10 feet.
Anthony, does this explain sometimes when you're in a room, like if I'm at a friend's house or something, I've never been in that room before, and we're listening to music that has like a little more bass than normal, you can literally walk around the room, and some places the bass is a lot louder, some places there's no bass, some places the bass is a lot quieter. So depending on where you're standing in the room, you get more or less bass.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not subtle. By the way,
Not at all.
I want to be clear. While I love talking about really esoteric notions of audio and acoustics and psychoacoustics and little things that, you know, are the little texture that make things perfect, everything I'm talking about here are big, very audible events. This is nothing, none of this is subtle. When you have a difference between, so in the case of this over here, the difference between the seat position and a position over here, which would be one row in front and one row to the left, would be about 20 to 25 dB of bass sensation at certain frequencies. That's not subtle.
That's a lot, yeah.
That's huge. That's like taking the volume control and going, you know, way down on the bass. So the kick drum, if this was at 50 hertz, which is right where a kick drum is, would sound very puny here. Excuse me, very puny at the seat position, and you get up and you move over here and you're like, boom, boom, boom.
It's kicking, yeah.
Wow, big difference. And so we have to place subwoofers in the room so as to avoid this syndrome. So your friend who has a room like this, I'm going to assume they're not going to tear down the walls and start all over. Good news is there's a way to place the subwoofers and tune them to where this problem is reduced. So this is a kind of a more mathematical representation of what I just explained, which is if you take a room in which the sound wave is twice as long as the room, the resultant sound level would look like this. So the room's twice as long, but once the wave goes back and forth and propagates, it's going to be loud at the back, loud at the front, and very quiet in the middle. At twice that frequency, which is what fills the whole room, you're going to have a null at 1/4 and 3/4. At 3 times that frequency, you're going to have a null at 1/6, what's called 3/6, which is a half, and then 5/6. And not subtle. This null over here would be 15, 20 dB below the level up here, not subtle. And then at the fourth harmonic, which is 4 times this basic frequency, you'll have a null at 1/8, a null at 3/8, 5/8, and 7/8. This basically just propagates an 8. So this is 1/8. This peak would be at 2/8, which is 1/4. All right. So interesting thing, and this is the next phase in this conversation, is for there to be a standing wave null, the sound pressure in the room actually has to flip like a seesaw. It actually has to change back and forth. If you go back to looking at that diagram and you go, I see the sound going back and forth, and you could imagine that when it's high pressure over here on one side, it's going to be, I'm sorry, when it's a positive sound pressure, it's a negative sound pressure on the opposite side. So it's going to be equally loud here as here, but inverse polarity, which is really weird. And actually, in some rooms, you can stand right at the null, turn sideways, and hear a phase flip. Just like if you set up 2 speakers out of phase, you hear that there's a hole in the middle. You can do the same thing. You can move sideways in the room, and you go, whoa, as you move back and forth, you get that funny sensation of, I have a head cold, and it's bizarre. That's when it's
exactly what you mean. Sure.
And we're going to use that to our advantage. So in the first harmonic, the polarity flips back and forth. In the second harmonic, when there's a positive polarity here, there's a negative polarity, and there's a positive over here. In a third harmonic, when there's a plus here, minus there, plus, minus, etc. So if it is a standing wave that causes the null, not a boundary reflection, an individual boundary reflection, but a real standing wave, the sound pressure is going to go like this around the node. That point is like a seesaw, like a balanced beam with a node in the middle, and there's going to be a null here with a positive and negative. And you're telling me, why do I need to know this? Wait, there's more. You'll see. So there are a bunch of different ways you can predict all of this stuff. There's a bunch of programs you can download, and actually, since I wrote this, I'm sure there's other people. Just do web searches and see what's there. I will say caveat emptor, which is a Latinian for saying, hey, these things aren't always super accurate, or don't always take into account the fact that in US construction and increasing around the world where we put gypsum board on studs and the walls can flex a bit in the bass frequency, sometimes the actual frequency of resonance is different than the prediction. Jason, sound check, can you still hear me?
Yep, everything's good.
Excellent. Okay, so This is the chart we created for ourselves using Excel that allows us to put in some dimensions of the room and predict on stiff wall conditions what are the standing wave frequencies, and then lay them out graphically and doing a sort to see where there would be resonances. The main thing you want to do is to avoid any resonance frequencies from being much closer than 5% from each other, because at that point they start to help each other out and create a long decay in the standing wave resonance drop-off. So solutions, really quickly, include trying to put base absorbers, and there's diaphragm absorbers you can put on the wall. There's Helmholtz absorbers you can put on the wall. We designed this really wacky product called a spring trap, which is a combination of the above. It's this diagram shows that it's a big membrane that's mounted on precision springs with 3 individual Helmholtz resonators inside.
So there's actually some mechanics in there.
Yeah,
things are moving.
Things are moving. There's a lot of different ways to think of this thing. One of it is to think of as a mechanically amplified Helmholtz absorber. So Helmholtz works really well, but it's very inefficient. It only works over the size of the aperture of the box. You know, this is a very simple diagram of a Helmholtz resonator, but basically a big enclosure with a port on the front, kind of like a big wine bottle, does absorb pretty well at certain frequencies, but only over the size of the aperture. So we came up with the idea of putting a very large membrane, kind of like a sail, to excite 3 different Helmholtz resonators inside a box, and therefore mechanically amplify the effect, sort of the inverse of a horn. You can think of it as this thing that's collecting a lot of sound pressure and focusing it into the tip of the triangle. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's a sort of simple way to look at it.
And that energy is just converted.
Converted into what?
The energy is just converted into, I'm guessing, heat, right?
Heat. So, and by the way, I could spend 4 hours talking just about this, and I won't. I presented an AES paper on this whenever 10, 12 years ago when we first got the patent on it. I will say this, that when this plate moves in response to standing waves, you put this thing in the corner, and where there are standing waves, there's a lot of pressure. When the plate moves, it transmits to the other side, and it actually moves air molecules back and forth in here. At the resonances where they go through the port, all of the air molecules have to squeeze through the port to the other side and come back and in and out. And when they squeeze through, first of all, air that's compressed heats up, and then 2, as they friction through the port, there's more heat. So all of that dissipates into heat. The amount of heat is, millionths of a degree.
Oh yeah, sure.
But that's how it's converted. It's into heat.
That's cool.
This is a diagram that shows the change of modal of energy decay in a cubic bunker, like all concrete, over 2 seconds. And this is a representation of the net absorption effect of that thing. And let's move on. So when they're standing waves, you can do something. There's a bunch of different things you can do, including trying to put some absorption in the room. Next thing is to try to place the subwoofers in places where, through planning and modeling, they don't excite the standing waves quite so much. And there's always going to be a fight between aesthetics and acoustics. Where aesthetics, where acoustics say to put the subwoofers is usually where aesthetics are going to go, you want to do what?
Are you crazy? Yeah.
You want to put the subwoofer right there by the entrance where I'm going to trip over it, or where it's going to look ugly because I wanted to put my coffee table there? Well, why don't you turn the subwoofer into a coffee table? No. So I just want to acknowledge that there's often a fight between those two. Generally, in placing the subwoofer, the legend that you can put a subwoofer anywhere because it's omnidirectional, it is omnidirectional, but its interaction with the standing waves of the room have huge effects. So you can't just put it anywhere. Sorry, that legend was an easy one. It doesn't quite work that way. You want to put it in a way that you don't excite standing waves. Now, over the years, it has been found that instead of using 1 big subwoofer, it's better to use 2 smaller ones, and it's even better to use 4 even smaller ones for the same total horsepower, but to distribute the bass in the room. And I'm going to show you how that works. The 4 subwoofers would be used in mono, so playing actually the same sound, although they could be delayed in time and changed. They could have different levels, have a different time delay and different EQ to each one of them, but they're playing the same sound. So in the ideal world, you have a rectanguloid or even non-rectanguloid room in which you have 4 subwoofers, in which there's some kind of device to process the sound, so they have different levels, different delay, and different EQ. Other things you can do to reduce the effects of standing waves is to move the seats. So don't sit at places where there's peaks or dips. And ultimately, as you're trying to find a good place for the subwoofer, measure the frequency response. So if you only have one subwoofer, not four, but you only have one, I have found that by putting the subwoofer on a dolly and putting microphones around the seating position, either a single mic if that's all you have, or four mics with the multiplexer. So this is a thing, it's a device that switches between the four microphones, and the guys at AV Pro Edge do sell one, by the way. And you can move the subwoofer around while playing pink noise and observe at the seating area what effect that has. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you will end up with a position. You'll end up with a position where it's not ugly, and the bass is reasonably smooth at the seating position. And if you end up with that, where it actually sounds good and it's punchy and it's good, the next thing you have to do is to go out and buy a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Because you got really lucky, because it's really hard for that to happen.
That reminds me of what an old DIY audio trick was, the old subwoofer crawl trick.
Yeah.
Very similar, right? But now you're doing it with scientific instruments and actually seeing it on a graph.
Right. So there are people who have said to put a subwoofer on the seat and walk around. Actually, that doesn't work under all frequencies. Imagine the seat happens to be where there's a null at the second harmonic.
Yeah, then you're
going to cancel out the standing wave. I'm about to explain that. So the better way to do it is just, why put it on a dolly? Why? Because we're all old and our backs all hurt, and these subwoofers are big, and if you don't put them on a dolly, you're just going to end up scratching the floor or hurting your back. So the next call is to a chiropractor. And right now, you can't go see a chiropractor.
Nope.
I hate that. So let's talk about subwoofer placement. So the thing about actually speaker placements and subwoofer placement is there is a place you can put a driver so that you can drive the standing waves in a cancellation. What am I talking about? Remember this little diagram of these bat wings with the plus and minus and this half? Remember that the acoustic polarity, when there really is a standing wave, which is our biggest problems for subwoofer placement, you can actually see that the pressure is going back and forth in the room. If you have a room like this, so this is a side view of the room. This is your client wearing a red hat and a blue suit and some red socks. It's all matched. You put a subwoofer over here. The standing waves, if this room, for example, is 20 feet long, there's going to be a standing wave character set up so that there's a null at 1/4 of the room and a null at 3/4 of the room, right where your client is sitting. And they're going, you sold me this big Bososonic subwoofer that's supposed to be kick-ass. I heard all the reviews. They're amazing, but I don't hear any bass. And you're like, I don't know what's going on. So you start changing the cable. It doesn't change anything. You put a $500 power cord, doesn't change the sound. So what's going on? Standing waves, man. So what do we do with this? Well, you could actually move the client off from that position. Imagine you move them forward, they would end up hearing that bass better. If the client says, no, this is where I'm putting the couch, okay? This is where it's going to go. Okay, so we have a problem. If, however, you move the subwoofer to this point, right in the null, at 1/4 of the room, remember what the null wants to do is what the standing wave wants to do is it wants to create the seesaw of pressure, where it's positive here, it wants to be negative there. Jason, can you confirm that you can see my mouse bouncing around here?
You're good.
Okay. But if you move the subwoofer over here, the subwoofer wants to energize this side and that side equally. The standing wave wants to go like this, and the subwoofer wants to do that. So the subwoofer is going to contradict the standing wave. You'll end up with less standing wave. And so your client at that point goes, oh, I hear the bass. So what'd you do? I just moved the subwoofer. Thank you. That just cost you $600. No. So that's one way you can do it. All right, so just move the subwoofer away from the front wall, down the side wall, and you may, if you're lucky, end up reducing the front to back standing wave. Or you can put two subwoofers on either side of that null that are connected equally in mono, and where the standing wave wants to go like this, the subwoofer is pushing like this, and you're contradicting the setup of the standing wave. It just is going to sound better. The bass is going to be back. Okay, now. This is called experiment a lot. So here you have maybe two subwoofers on two dollies. Maybe on the other drawing you had one subwoofer and a dolly. You're moving it back and forth. Maybe the deepest null is not exactly at 1/4. Maybe it's a little somewhere else because the walls are a little bit flexible. You need to be prepared to experiment. So that is what happens when you're moving the subwoofers around. Fast forward into an element of research done by Todd Welty. First of all, a spectacular individual, just not even talking about acoustic, a really nice guy, okay? Number two, a doctor in acoustics. He actually got his doctorate on subwoofers, on actually this topic. He studied this ad nauseum. He did all of the math, very advanced research, all kinds of really crazy physics analysis, and he came up with a much clearer understanding of the construction of standing waves in room, and came up with the fact that if you put 4 subwoofers in the corners and light them up with the same sound, you end up with a lot less standing wave. He also suggested 4 subwoofers at the 4 midpoints works well, and also suggested that 2 subwoofers if you only have 2 subwoofers at the midpoint here works well. And I should have a diagram of this, but also a subwoofer at the midpoint of the front and midpoint of the front, the midpoint of the front, midpoint of the back also works well. So main idea being, rather than drive the room from one place where you're launching the wave and you're letting it resonate with the room, you're actually driving the room from multiple places and contradicting the standing waves between the left and right and the front and back. And if you actually spend a little bit of mental arithmetic thinking about how this layout interferes with the first order, second order, and third order, and fourth order construction of standing waves, they'll go, wow, that's brilliant. That works really well. So I've now designed and built, let's just say 500 rooms using this. I can't even remember. This knowledge, by the way, is not brand new. Todd presented his first paper on this, I want to say in 2003. Now I'm spacing out. It's information that's almost 20 years old. So we've been designing rooms like this. Todd and I have been trading data on how the rooms are working out. We've been doing this a lot, and I confirm this works really, really well at producing bass in the room that's really even. Okay, and that said about subwoofers, I'm going to move to the next topic. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Real quick, Anthony. Jim asks if you have to time align a 4 subwoofer arrangement like that, what you just showed before.
Yeah. What do you do? So I'm going to go to this. So first step, this is actually in phases in subwoofer placement. First step is if you only have 1 subwoofer, know that you really need to experiment in the room with a dolly and a signal generator and a measurement device, all of which is available cheap. A dolly is 12 bucks. Okay, don't buy the cheap dolly for 7 bucks. It's going to fall apart. Buy the expensive one for 12 bucks. $12, nothing. Buy a $70 test microphone, USB test microphone. You deserve it. Your client deserves it. And spend a little time experimenting. Charge your client for the time. This is part of the calibration. So 1 subwoofer, you got to move it around. 2 subwoofers, you can move them around. If you can go to 4 subwoofers, start off by just putting them in the 4 corners of this room if it's a rectangular room, and I'll show you what I would do in non-rectangular rooms when we get to that a little later. And plan. So if you do this, it's already going to be a ton better than doing the 1 subwoofer in the corner in the front wall, as is shown in all the propaganda out there. So this is better. If you can take the next step, which is actually the next level of research by Todd Welty and one of his colleagues, Alan Devantier, French-Canadian, and you connect those 4 subwoofers at the output of a 4-channel EQ. So 1 input, 4 outputs, and you can actually adjust the level and delay and EQ of the 4 subwoofers individually. You go to the next level of stratosphere. It's amazing what you can do. What I tend to do, I'm sorry, if I have a lot of time, I'll measure the impulse response of the 4 subwoofers, put those into a giant number crunching spreadsheet, look at what the predictions are for how you have to advance and delay the different subwoofers, and plug that in and see what it does. A lot of times you don't have that much time. So my guideline on this, and this we're going to talk about when I do the course on calibration, is start off by delaying the subwoofers in pairs. So I'll take those 2, group them together in the EQ, and delay them by 2 milliseconds, then 4, and then 6, and then 8, and then 10, and observe how the frequency response changes around the seating position with 4 microphone, what's called temporal and spatial averaging, which is just averaging over time and space. And then if you actually see that as you're delaying those, the response gets better and better and better, just keep going. And at some point, you'll actually see that it stopped getting better and you're past the peak and it gets worse.
Right.
If that doesn't work, try delaying the fronts. If that doesn't work, try delaying the two lefts or try delaying the two rights. And I've been in a few rooms where the time synchronization or time alignment of those has no effect on the standing waves. That's the minority of cases. The majority of the time, there's a huge effect. The biggest one I've seen is a 12 dB increase in base level from 20 hertz to 45 hertz just by delaying the back subwoofer 6 milliseconds.
Oh, wow.
I do a CDA course on this. All of the data's there. It's a 3-hour course. Like I said, I think we're planning on a webinar coming up about this, and I'll shut up so that we don't do a complete spoiler alert. All right, I hope that answered the question. So the prep of this is to make sure those 4 subwoofers can be hooked up somewhere in your system to 4 channels of digital EQ. If you're lucky enough to be working with one of the top level surround decoders that actually has enough outputs and enough EQ to do that, that's great. Otherwise, add an EQ, which you could always have for all of the channels, and just make sure you've got 4 channels for the subwoofers.
Anthony, John asks, how do you time align those low frequencies? Is that a ETC on a pink sweep?
So there are lots of different ways to do it. Like I said, a true impulse response examined very carefully and mathematically analyzed is the best way. The quick way is play what is called in Room EQ Wizard a periodic pink noise, which sounds kind of like pink noise. It's like this rumble, but it actually has a period to it and a lower peak to average ratio. So I'm feeding that into the 4 subwoofers, and I'm measuring at the seat position, not in ETC, but just in straight FFT, in FFT analysis, very similar to standard real-time analysis. It's a little more sophisticated than that, and just observing how the response is changing. When you get to the low frequencies, you really want really long windows. You want to have a lot of resolution, and that's very, very similar to steady state responses.
Great, thank you.
Okay, let's talk about surround speaker placement. So just like front speaker placement, you want to plan and model this stuff. You want to make sure that the interaction between the speaker and the room boundaries doesn't introduce major peaks and dips. It's acoustically and electroacoustically, it's all the same stuff that we talked about the front speakers for hours and hours and hours, and I'm not going to repeat it. Now let's talk about the ideal locations and some of the other things you need to be thinking about. So they're generally to the sides and behind the listeners. So the first one I'm talking about here is the side surround speakers. Typically they want to be up a little bit over your seated ear height, and really the target is 15 degrees. That's the same thing that is done in movie theaters and in dubbing stages. The speakers are not at seated ear height, they're above it, and they do that for lots of reasons, including that it just sounds more realistic in terms of what you put back there. It also can allow to cover the audience more evenly. So the speakers in the reference mix environment are 15 degrees above seated ear height. If you do the trigonometry of that in a room that's about 20 to 25 feet wide, and you go, well, how far up do I have to go? That's about 60 centimeters or 24 inches above seated ear height, which puts it, at about close to 5.5 to 6 feet off the floor. Now, you want to make sure that those surround speakers can ensure adequate coverage for everybody in the room. So you want to avoid a condition where on the left side of the room you're blasted by it, and the right side of the room you don't hear any of it, which is what would happen if you put it right at seated ear height. All right, there's some people go, oh no, for high resolution surround, you want it at seated ear height. Well, that may or may not work depending on the reference environment, and it works well for one seating position. Once you have 4 seats across or 5 seats across, you put a speaker right here, and the person on the left side, by the left surround, is hearing nothing but that, and the person on the other side hears none of it. As you move the speaker up and aim it towards the seating position, you end up with something that's a little smoother. So this is the overall guideline. I'm just simplifying it down. About 100 degrees from your seat position. 0 would be directly in front. So 100 degrees for the left and the right. And I'm color coding these where left is blue, right is red. And 15 degrees up. Okay, that's the really basic, with no regard to what the room acoustics would do to that position. That's just sort of the ideal in anechoic conditions. Now,
Anthony, I'm sorry, just a question real quick. Prasad asks, for the side surrounds, would you prefer bipole or a normal point source speaker?
this course is going great because that's the next slide.
Oh, look at that.
Proof. And I haven't distributed this class to anybody ahead of time.
That's funny.
So
no, good question,
that.
Prasad. Yeah, just hang tight. Hang tight. It sounds like we're going to get there.
So what about directivity of surround? So the traditional two-way speaker is okay. You know, the box with a woofer and a tweeter, they work fine for today's sound fields. Know that below 3 kilohertz, the sound, you know, the radiation of those is broad, and what you'll hear is some direct sound, some reflected sound. It's all good. Above 3 kilohertz, they tend to beam more. So a regular two-way speaker placed to your side may actually call attention to itself every time there's a surround effect. And rather than be in the movie feeling like you're surrounded by a sound field, you may find yourself feeling like, well, I hear a speaker.
It's right there.
You may it's right there. And you may find yourself taking your eyes off the screen and looking over at that speaker because your instinct of preservation says to look at sounds that are clearly localized outside of your field of vision, without which you get eaten.
Yeah.
So, or run over by a bus or whatever it is. So these regular two-way speakers work well in rooms that are not too small. If a room is small, so what I mean by small, if a room's only 15 or 16, up to about 18 feet wide, where at the middle position, you're 6, 7, 8, 9 feet from the speaker, it may be better to use something that's a broader dispersion so that the speaker is lighting up more of the surfaces around the room and giving you a sensation more of sound field rather than the sensation of just a point coming from there. And so that's where dipoles and bipoles come in. To be clear, what is the difference between a dipole and a bipole? So a dipole is any speaker in which there are drivers pointing in opposite directions or close to opposite directions that are out of polarity with each other. When one's pushing air, the other one's pulling air, and vice versa. And where the two meet, there's a null. So this over here is a null of radiation that comes from the fact that where that's positive and that's negative, right where they meet, there's a cancellation. So right in this axis, there's very little direct sound being sent. The sound's going everywhere else. A bipole could be the same box, but in which the drivers are in phase with each other. So they're radiating wide, they're lighting up other surfaces, there's still a fair amount of direct sound going to you. And which is more better? It depends on the room. It depends on your taste. Depends on your seating position relative to the room. And that's, I do want to spend a little time on that. I know this webinar is not so much on selecting speakers. I could spend 5 hours talking about how to pick the best speaker for a room. But before you decide where to put them, you got to know what kind of speaker you have. As a reminder, the intended presentation is that, as shown here in a movie theater, seen from the top. These are the screen channels as they're known in that business, left, center, and right. These are all the seats. And this is the array of speakers on the left side of the room, array of speakers on the right side of the room, array of speakers in the back. This is what it's like in a regular movie theater. Those speakers are usually hooked up together. They're playing about the same sound. And when you're sitting over here, you don't really hear one speaker, you hear a sound field. You get a sense that, hey, the sound's coming from that general area. And you may be tempted to look over there, but it's kind of smoothed out over the whole zone and it doesn't distract you too much. So this is the intended presentation. So how do we get there? Well, what we want is to achieve about the same sensation, that same, you see this crescent of sound? In French, it's croissant. I'm hungry already. You want, ultimately, you want to achieve the same result. That's sort of the whole concept of hi-fi sound is to try to achieve the intended presentation, whether it's for music in a concert hall or in this case sound as it's presented to the director. So in a small room, a pair of dipole speakers put to your side with the energy lobes going front and back away from you can work very well. In a small room, I mean something that may be 18 feet long by 14, 15, 16 feet wide. They work quite well at presenting the sense of envelopment, regardless of the format, whether it's 5-channel or 7-channel or 4-channel, doesn't really matter. And the idea, I got a little graphic, I got rid of it, just too many graphics. So this is an idea that emanated in the early 90s with what Home THX was trying to do at the time to try to simulate in a small room the sound of a dubbing stage. And I worked there at that time, and we had a listening room right next to the dubbing stage, and we could compare, and we messed with stuff until they sounded the same.
Yeah.
And that's how it gets there. In a bigger room, that doesn't work. Okay, if a room is 25 or 30 feet long, a pair of dipole speakers on the side will just get lost in the sound field, and you don't have any sensation that the sound is over here or over there, and you just don't do that. So it all depends on the room size. So a pair of dipoles or bipoles may give you this nice enveloping surround, and direct speakers may not. So dipoles, where do you put them? If you have a room like that that's rectanguloid and you're sitting a little bit further back from the middle, this is where you put them. It's very simple, just at 90 degrees from your side. The reflections are going to bounce off the back wall. There's going to be some reflections off the front wall. Mainly, you're going to get a sensation that the sound is surrounding you from over there. If you are sitting in the middle of the room and you put the surround speakers, those dipoles, right to your side of your room, they're going to light up the front wall as well as the back wall, and you're not going to get a sensation that the sound is enveloping you from kind of slightly behind you. So at that point, you move the speakers back a little bit, you tilt them, you turn them a bit so that the null's pointing at the listener, and everything works well. If you have, aim the null at the seat position. If you have a couch or a seat right on the back wall and you have a pair of dipole speakers, where do you put those? Well, if you put them all the way up against the back wall, they're not going to work. You move them a little forward, you point it all over here. It's not an ideal condition, but that is what you're working with. So about 2 feet, 60 centimeters forward from the rear wall, and you aim the null at the seating position. What if you have a pair of dipole speakers and 3 rows of seats? Well, at that point, you have a room that's big enough that you probably shouldn't use dipole speakers. If that's what you happen to have, because that's what the client has said, I want to use these speakers, or that's what's in your bill of materials. What I found has worked pretty well is move the speakers a little further back, point the null generally towards the second row like this, towards the middle of the room, and it generally does a pretty good job. It's not ideal, okay? By the way, if you do have a sets of dipoles in a room that's equally big, 3 rows of seating, and that's what you're working with, you can put 4 dipole speakers, 2 on the left side, 2 on the right side. Do make sure that the polarities are reversed this way, so that you have a plus to the minus, and then the minus facing each other into the plus. And same thing on the other side. The way to do that is to take the speaker that's designed to be on the right wall and put it on the left wall, and vice versa. When manufacturers make dipole speakers for surrounds, you look at them and they will be labeled as left and right. And what they mean by that is when that speaker is placed to the left, the positive lobe is going forward and the negative lobe is going back. That speaker over here would actually be a right speaker placed on the left side, just so that the polarities of the acoustic pressures match. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a funny cancellation over here. It won't sound good. Final thing on these dipoles, again, is if you do have a big reverberant room, a big room that is naturally more reverberant, and again, the client has said, I want to use these dipole speakers, and you go, no, you don't get it. We're going to use these speakers I already have. Okay, what you can do is actually turn them a little bit so that there's a little bit more direct sound towards the listener. What I'm showing here is there's a null pointing here at the near listener, which means they're not going to get blasted by that speaker. And then there's some direct sound going to these guys. So in a way, you can actually, with a dipole, you can tune how much direct sound is pointing at who, and you can actually end up with a more consistent result if you know what you're doing. All right, so dipoles can get lost in larger rooms, and you want to make sure that the lobes are pointing at the right place. All right.
Question real quick, Anthony, from Malik. Can a bipole or dipole be used for Atmos in the ceiling, or is that something that you'd rather see?
That's a good question. I have tried that. Don't work so good in proper English. It doesn't work very well, except in rooms with really short ceilings. So again, this class is going great because in a few slides I'm going to start talking about where to put the top speakers. Hold that thought. I'll get back to it.
And then one more from Mike. He says, would you agree that dipoles are an artifact from the 90s when surround information was limited frequency and mono, and they have less significance with full range or direct sound information?
I disagree because the question is actually bringing too many things all together. So first of all, the dipole can be full range. And actually, the THX certified dipoles were 80 hertz speakers, and nothing stops it from going lower. Note that they were dipolar down to 500 hertz, and below that they became omnidirectional. And that's a region of frequency where your auditory system doesn't have good directional cues anyway. So all of those speakers that you're calling artifacts from the 90s, they all were quote unquote full range, as in they went down low enough to then meet the subwoofer and then go on down from there. So that's one thing. Second thing is the idea of them was a way in a smaller room, which is the only artifact from the 90s is the fact that at the time people had smaller rooms that they were listening in. The majority of people that had home cinemas, home theaters, were in rooms that were 20 feet long, 18 to 20 feet long. It's changed a lot now, and the only artifact is about the smaller rooms. That's it. Whether it's mono surrounds or two-channel surrounds or multi-channel, that doesn't really matter. What matters is the interaction of directivity, seating position, sensation of annoyance from over there. So the answer is not really, but I think you can do things better with direct radiators today if you know where to place them, and as long as the room is not too small. Good. Once the room is small, if it's a bedroom-sized room, you're going to end up finding that if you set the levels of what I'm about to talk over here of direct radiating speakers at reference level, you're going to always be distracted by them. You're going to hear them. So you're going to turn the level down, and that's not right. It's not, I mean, it's a way to band-aid the issue, but it's not ideal. All right, so let's talk about direct radiating speakers. So a pair of direct radiating speakers should be placed over here at 100 degrees on the side walls, slightly behind the listener area, and slightly higher up in the room, around 6 feet, that corresponds to that 15-degree position. Avoid placing too close to listener because that is distracting. If you have a larger room, it is difficult to cover all of the audience with just one pair. And what I mean by cover is give the same sensation of surroundness or envelopment or ratio from front to side to back. And it's better to start going to more pairs. So 2 sets of sides on the left and the right is good, and you adjust the position and the gain for even coverage. Okay. Somebody did actually ask in this last question, said, hey, if you're doing this, even though we hadn't talked about surrounds very much, if you're doing this, is it worth changing the level and delay of that back pair? Yes, it is. We'll talk about that during the calibration. But at this back row, you have less level from the front speakers than at the front row. And so to have the same sensation of front to surround ratio, you actually turn these down. How much do you turn them down? Very easy. You take a sound pressure meter and you measure the level here. You measure the level there on mid-range pink noise, which is a test tone that's in every surround decoder. If this is 2 dB quieter, turn these down by 2 dB. And then in terms of delay, you are in the distance from here to here is the same as from here to here, but you got a longer distance over here, so you have to change that handicap, and you may want to delay those by the difference in space. So if there's 10 feet of difference in the seating positions over here, you may want to introduce 10 milliseconds more delay to those speakers. Experiment, listen, play pink noise, play test signals, and you'll be able to find that. Okay.
Anthony, when you say not to put them too close to the listener, is there kind of a general rule of thumb there? I guess that would probably depend on the room dimensions too, right?
It depends on the room dimensions. And, you do want to put them on the sidewalls. You want to put them as far away as you can from you. Actually, you want to put them ideally at the same distance from your head that the front speakers are. So if you're 12 feet away from the front speakers, you would want the surrounds to be, or the sides and the backs to be 12 feet away. That assumes you got a really big ass room. And
yeah, it's huge, yeah.
That's not how most rooms are done. So you got to put them as far away as possible. If they're close, if they're only 4 feet away from you, I guarantee that a direct radiating speaker will always call attention to itself. And at that point, it may be better to switch to bipoles or dipoles.
Sure.
Now, if you have non-ideal conditions, if you have to put the speakers further back, if you have to put them further up, just remember to aim them. Speakers have a directivity. They only really sound good over a window that's about plus and minus 25 degrees, 20 to at most 30 degrees, but typically 20 to 25 degrees from straight on axis. And so you want to aim them. To make sure that you are hearing the speakers correctly, knowing how much to aim them is just a matter of playing pink noise in the speaker and listen on axis of the speaker and go off axis to the seating position, tilt the speaker until you hear it's full beam of sound. Same thing front to back and top to bottom. Now, what if your couch is on the back wall and you've got direct radiating speakers? Well, you've got to put them over here at your sides. 1 foot, don't put them too close to the back wall or else they're going to sound terrible. 1 foot to 1.5 feet. And if they have to be up high because there's a window over here, make sure to aim them down. Otherwise, they're not going to sound good. All right, back surround speakers. A lot of the same idea. You can use dipoles, you can use bipoles, you can use direct radiators, and it's all a question of how big your room is. Or what your client is forcing you to use, which is the wrong reason, by the way. Just being stuck in a legacy product that somebody has had for 20 years is not necessarily a good idea, but sometimes that's what happens. So remember that the placement of those back speakers wants to form about 165-degree angle to your seat position. A very cool thing to do in small rooms, so this would be maybe, let's say you have a really small room, it's 15 feet long, it's 12 foot wide, your couch is close up to the back wall. I've successfully taken a single dipole speaker and put it up a little bit over your head, radiating sideways, and you get a sensation that the sound is sort of behind you without it tapping you on the head. Okay, and that's something that's worth experimenting with. Doesn't always work right, but it's worth doing. If you put 2 dipole speakers back here and the couch is right up close to the back wall, you're going to have a sensation that the sound that's supposed to be behind you is actually above you, not right. So that's one way you can do it. So place that back channel all the way back on the back wall.
Anthony, would you still, if you're talking about this scenario that's on the screen right now, would you still set that up? Would that still set up as a 7.1 and or is it 6.1 at that point?
So in most surround decoders, when you get to the configuration menu, it's going to ask you, do you have a center speaker?
Right.
Yes. Is it full range or is it limited range or you know, small or large?
Yeah.
Never use large. There's no reason. Actually, I shouldn't say no reason. There's very few reasons to ever use large. Large means the speaker is going to be playing full range from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, which most speakers can't play in the case of cinematic sound pressure. It also means that you're going to have standing wave interactions with that center speaker in the room. You should never do that. So the 3 front speakers, all the speakers should be put in small mode, by the way. Nothing to do with speaker placement, everything to do with calibration. We'll get to that another week. So at some point as you go around the menu, it's going to ask you, do you have back speakers? Yes, no. And sometimes the better surround decoders ask you, how many do you have? 1 or 2. And if you tell it you have 1, it's going to take the 7-channel mix and sum the 2 back channels together into that single speaker.
Cool. Good.
Thanks for
awesome.
Question. Okay, another way to do it is to use in a slightly larger room with a couch further off the wall, 2 back directional speakers. Place them at about 6 feet off the ground, same height as the sides. Place them 165 degrees from front center. I've now said that about 12 times today. But watch for psychoacoustic inversion. What? So the auditory system of a human being is weird in that you can have 2 sounds from in front of you go this way to your head. If they're the same sounds and they enter your ears at the same time, we interpret that as the sound coming from the 2 speakers. We all know that. Everybody who's been listening to 2-channel audio knows that, right? So two decent speakers placed 45 to 50 degrees from each other, playing the same sound, produce a sound in the middle. It's called a phantom center. And that's what we've been listening to in hi-fi sound for 50, 60 years. Well, guess what? 2 good speakers placed behind you at plus and minus 30 degrees or 25 degrees, the same ways. Sometimes the way they go into your ear canal is the same. It does skirt off the back of your ear, the back of your, that thing, that ear flap called a pinna, off the back of your ear, but it does go into your ear canal correlated, and it can be misinterpreted as sound from in front of you. Which is not the intended presentation. And you watch a movie in which there's a spaceship that goes from the front of the screen, goes to the side, in the movie it disappears, and when it goes to the back, suddenly the sound's in front of you, and like, what?
Wait a second, yeah. I thought it just left.
So years and years and years ago, way back in 1998, when I was involved in designing the Surround EX thing, the first experiment we did of building a room with the new encoder decoder we had designed when I was at THX failed. We had put a pair of speakers on the back wall, and things weren't working. We're like, whoa, I can hear the sound there, but it sounds like it's from in front. What's wrong? What's going on? And it was a psychoacoustic inversion. Watch out, it's really annoying. And there's no aspirin you can take to get rid of it. So the way around it is to actually break the correlation between the two back speakers, as in don't make them work so well together. You can place them at different heights. You can aim them at different places. If you have equalization, you can actually equalize them differently so that their time response is slightly different and there isn't as correlated of a sound. You can put them at different locations. But first of all is be aware that there is this ailment. It can happen. And then try to fix it with either an asymmetrical placement, different time delay, a different EQ, something. And you'll find that about 20% of the cases, 20 to 30% of the cases, when you're setting up a room for 7-channel, you will end up with this problem. So let's switch out of back speaker. And by the way, in all other ways, all of the things we've talked about for front speakers, which is the interaction between the speaker and the boundaries and the standing waves and the angle and all of that stuff, it's all the same as the front. However, if you have a back left speaker that has a less than ideal acoustical environment around it, you won't hear that as much as you would out of the center speaker. Why? Because the center speaker largely dominates the sound energy in the room. Then the left and right speakers are typically 3 dB less energy in the room. The sides are another 3 dB down and the backs are another 3 dB down. So even if the back speakers are not in ideal acoustical conditions, which is measurable and audible when you play the signal there, I do want to reduce your fear on that you probably won't hear it in the context of a movie. Right. If you are doing high-end audio or audio video, the client deserves for all of the speakers to sound good, because that's finessing. I promised in this presentation, I don't want to talk about little minutiae of finessing. I want to talk about big things. So the psychoacoustic inversion is not a finessing thing. The sound sounds like it's in the wrong place, totally audible to everybody. Right. Pardon me. Let's talk about top speakers. Everybody wants to hear about. Yep.
Real quick, Anthony, there's one last question about the back speakers from Dan. He says, what about stereo summing with a dual tweeter, single speaker as the back speaker with the left and right channels feeding it? So I think he's talking about a single stereo speaker.
Okay, I'm going to be gross about this.
No, no, he's giving the puke symbol, guys.
and actually that applies to everywhere where one of those single point stereo speakers is ever used. They suck. Yeah. Don't ever use those anywhere. They're stupid. Here's why. It seems like a really easy solution. Place the left and right signals, play them in there. The propaganda for the manufacturer makes you feel like you're getting stereo. You're not. The two tweeters that are side by side with each other are going to create all these lobing patterns. That means that right in front of the speaker, you get loud high frequency, and you move just a little bit and it's gone. You move again, it comes back. So when you're using them as sound in a hallway or in a room, I'm not even talking about surrounded here. I'm just talking about just whole house sound. Right under the speaker, you're going to have a peak of sound, and it's going to null out and then peak again, null out. It's much better just to use a regular wide dispersion speaker and accept the fact that one's playing left down the hall, the other one's playing right, the other one's playing left, the other one's playing right. Or if you can, in the head end, sum it all to mono and just do that. Okay, so as a back speaker in surround EX environment, multi-channel, don't use those. They're just they're a liability.
The only time I've really seen those myself is you're doing a whole house audio system for somebody and they just have one speaker in the entryway or something. I've never actually seen that before used in a stereo setup or in a surround setup. It's mainly for weird situations like that where you have one spot for a speaker.
Right. And in that situation, by the way, nothing to do with home theater. In that situation, I would stick with a regular single tweeter, single woofer speaker. Don't do that combination. It doesn't work. It will sound better, even if you're just playing the left channel only.
Right, which it'll still sound better, yeah.
Once in a while, you may miss something that the mixer actually ended up putting the right channel. Nobody will know, but I can guarantee that single point stereo speaker is going to sound bad all the time. Right under it, it's going to have a peak of high frequency, and you move, literally, you move 12 inches to the right, and you're going to lose all the high frequency, and you move again, it's going to be back. Just don't use those. Sorry, speaker manufacturers that sell those. I know that you're making probably more money on it, but it's a bad idea. Don't do it. Okay, let's talk about, speaking of top, let's talk about top speakers. So let's go back to the basics. Most of the time in immersive audio, you're going to play Dolby Atmos. I know that there's two other competing formats. They haven't really, in terms of access to software, they're not really on the map compared to what Dolby's been able to do. And we can argue they're the 800-pound gorilla, you know, whatever, conspiracy theories. I don't want to go there. I just want to go, your customer, you know, more of the time by a long margin is going to be listening to stuff done in Dolby Atmos. Did you know, for example, that every Netflix production starting last year is in Atmos?
Yes.
Whether or not there's a lot of sound up there,
right.
I you know, that's up to the director, the mixer, whoever's deciding that. But the rule at Netflix is it's all Atmos all the time. So when you think of Atmos, this is how speakers are laid out. So I always like to go back to the references. So what does Atmos bring to us? In gray over here, we have the original 3 speakers. Atmos does allow to add 2 half left, half right intermediate speakers, which are really useful in a really big movie theater. In a normal sized movie theater, like most of them are today, small actually, that's not really useful. In a really big screen, so like if a screen's 50, 60, 70 feet wide, it is nice to not rely on phantom centers between the left and center and right, but actually have a channel there. So Atmos has enough capacity in terms of data transmission to add half left and half right. There's almost no case in home cinemas that you're going to need to use that. Next thing that Atmos adds is these speakers. You know what? In this little graphic, interesting. Do you see on the bottom, mine is actually hidden here, but do you see on the bottom, does it actually say in blue added speakers or anything like that?
No, it just shows the blue speakers themselves.
Okay, so in this diagram, blue is all of the speakers that the world of Atmos is adding above and beyond a regular 7-channel theater, the regular Dolby Digital Plus, etc. So first thing in the discussion is there's a set of speakers in the front third of the room that didn't used to be there in the old world of 7-channel. On the right side and the left side, I've talked about that. Those are called the wide channels. You should use those wherever possible, and some rooms don't allow it. I'm about to show you that. Next thing is a row of speakers here and here at that half point. So see where that half left speaker is? Well, there's a line over here of these speakers and a line of those speakers, and you put enough of them in the room to cover the audience and produce this ability to locate the sound wherever you want. It depends on the size of the room. Another thing that Atmos introduces into movie theaters is more subwoofers to carry the bass from these surround channels. In home cinema, we are putting subwoofers everywhere. They are carrying all the bass, so that's not anything new. Just note that the cinema industry has finally caught on to that. This is another diagram that shows a little more graphically in a sweeter way, like where the speakers are. Let's move on. So in home cinemas, in the most typical condition, we're going to add a pair of top left and top right speakers, typically 4, sometimes only 2, and we'll talk about the rooms where they are. And we're also going to add these wide channels. So first thing, I'm starting with this because this often gets forgotten in the propaganda for Atmos and for immersive audio. First off is a pair of wide channel speakers that are at about 45 degrees from front center. This is 0 degrees, that's 45, typically somewhere right around there. Then we're going to add top speakers at these halfway points between the left and center and right. This is actually a reminder of what I had talked about last week in the beginning. And that front set's going to be about 30 degrees forward, back set's going to be about 20 to 30 degrees back. Okay, this is just a reminder. In larger rooms, we may use 3 pairs. For small rooms, we're going to use 1 pair because you just don't have the room. Remember to aim them at the seats. This is a side graphic that shows that same thing. Here's our listener. Happy camper over here, pair of speakers over here and there. Make sure they're aiming at the seat position. I keep saying that because I go into a lot of rooms in which the speakers are pointing straight down and you're 30, 40 degrees off axis of the speaker and they don't sound right, okay? So aiming them can look weird. I have a speaker in a bracket, it's pointed down, it can look weird. All of this stuff should be hidden behind stretch fabric anyway if you're doing a higher end room. So what more can I say? All of the same rules that apply to the interaction between the speaker and the room acoustics and standing waves and boundary conditions and all of that, those all apply, okay? Let's now talk about how you put this in the room. So here I am, again, 20 minutes over time, and I'm finally getting to what everybody really wanted to see. Do I keep going?
Yeah, that's okay, guys. If you have to jump off for any reason, we're recording the session. We'll have it up on YouTube. So if you guys need to jump off, no worries. If not, I have plenty of time to hang out. See if we'll get any feedback from the audience. Real quick, while I'm waiting for them to kind of put some feedback in. John has a really interesting question. I'm kind of curious myself, actually. Is it true that for home cinema, the 64 separate audio tracks of Atmos are reduced down to 12 or so to place the 3D audio?
That is a super loaded question.
Oh.
Yes, it's true that there's a lot less channels in home cinema, and that's okay, because we never have a condition of a room that's 120, 150 feet long, in which we need a lot of speakers to cover all the audience. So
right.
There's very few cases where you need more than 6 speakers up on the ceiling, even in rooms that are 35 or 40 feet long, and very few cases where you need more than 1 pair of wides and 2 pair of sides. So you don't really need many more channels than that. And I know some people are excited about putting a ton of channels. Whenever I've done rooms with super high speaker count, you end up with more comb filters, more interactions, and more challenges, and more stuff that doesn't work because there's just too much electronics, too much stuff going on. And it is like trying to juggle with 22 different balls. It's a mess.
Right.
You look like it. So let me just expand on that a little bit.
Sure.
So if a film mix is done with that many channels, that film mix is not what ends up on a consumer release. Right. It is reblended, remixed, realtered in a studio for home release, and it's essentially down mixed. So there's 2 parts to this question. First of all, is you don't need it. The second thing is what was designed for the home environment. Like when Netflix is doing something for home release, they're not mixing 64 channels.
Of course, yeah.
Or they're not thinking about 64 loudspeakers. So yes, there are a lot less channels, and you really don't need much more than really in many cases what would end up being, I would say 11.4.6. There's really no need to go much higher count than that in reality. Yeah.
And Jerry asks, what would the psychoacoustic inversion look like through a measurement system, or is it just purely based on listening?
That's a great question. If you actually could measure with very high accuracy the impulse response coming from the 2 speakers, and you could compare the amplitude and time response, the measurement from the left back speaker, or the back left and the back right, on your analyzer would completely overlay. They would look absolutely identical.
They look the same. Yeah.
They look the same. And then that would be an indication that something's wrong. However, there's more. I've actually been in rooms in which they look different, and you still have an inversion. And I've been in rooms in which they look the same and there's no inversion. So it's a complicated psychoacoustic thing that goes on in the brain of the human, which, to be honest, we haven't yet developed tools that completely tell us from an imaging point of view all of the things that our auditory system is able to do in spatial listening.
Yep. John says, I've played with the rear 15-degree stuff. Inversion is real and annoying, just as you said before. Absolutely.
Inversion is real. Nah.
Cool, guys. Well, the general consensus is to keep going, Anthony. So yeah, let's keep plowing through here.
Great. How many people do we have still on?
75.
75. Excellent. Yeah, it's worth it. 75 good people. All right.
Yep.
So what I'm going to first show you is a set of slides from projects that we've done with Atmos out of the, I don't know, like I said, I can't remember now how many Atmos rooms we've done, maybe 200 or 300. I'm just going to show you a few selected ones that are different types. Then I'm going to go to some crude diagrams of some weird shaped rooms. And then I'm going to go through, if we still have more time, I'm going to go through way more plan set pages and show you how we've dealt with all of this stuff. So let's do it. This is a CDA award-winning room, very simple, very basic, rectangular, by the book. This just shows a isometric rendering of the room. In here, you can actually see, this weird thing is actually the projector from our plan. This is the wide left speaker. You can see the left speaker here, the center speaker, the right one is hidden behind the frame. This is at an angle. There are 2 sets of bipole speakers in this room. It's a pretty small room. The room didn't actually have stretch fabric. It was black with black treatments, and it actually won a CD award. I was like, really? It was engineering-wise and experience-wise was great. It was ugly. The client was perfectly happy with that. He's, I will loosely call him a home theater geek, loves it.
Yeah.
So this is a view, a top view of the room showing the layout of things. So there's a left speaker, center speaker, right speaker, forming 50 degrees at the front row and 35 degrees at the back row, subtended angle to the left and right speakers. Over here are the side left speakers, side right speakers. Here's the wide left and the wide right. And this is an early room for us in Atmos, in which we actually followed the guidelines put out by Dolby at the time that the top speakers should be in line with the left and right speakers. And that they still have those guidelines published on their website. Don't do it. That doesn't work so well. Reason it doesn't work so well is this is far away enough in terms of angular position that it's a bit confused with the side speakers.
Yeah.
Right? So any room we've done, actually within 6 months after that, we've moved these speakers further in to be closer into the center portion. Okay? Those speakers were bipoles. So I forget now, was it Prasad who, somebody asked about, hey, bipoles or dipoles on the ceiling.
Right.
So in this particular room, because it was quite small, you can see from the layout of this that the walls are, pretty close in. We used bipole speakers here for the sides, bipole speakers for the back, bipole speakers for the top, and the idea was to try to have a direct to reflected ratio that was wasn't so focused on high directionality right to the listener, where every time there'd be an effect, you'd hear the speaker there, which is not what you want. So 4 subwoofers placed on the ceiling, by the way, not on the walls, but on the ceiling.
Cool.
They're on the ceiling. They're actually a shallow, this is all Triad speakers. They make really good stuff. Thank you, the guys at Triad. Now part of Control 4. So 4 of their relatively shallow subwoofers, small 10-inch driver and a relatively shallow cabinet, driven by 300 watts of power. 4 of those in the 4 corners tuned correctly got us up to 112 dB of sound pressure level in the bass, which is insane.
That's
awesome. For small subwoofers.
Yeah.
Well, if you place them correctly and you optimize them correctly and you tune them correctly and you put some limiters to make sure that when you get to the peak, they don't go bang, 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 you can play stupid loud out of really small cabinets. So I'm very excited about this room because this is a case of something that really didn't cost very much money, but gave kick-ass performance. And the guys from the CEDIA judging committee said, yep, you get an award, congratulations. So what else? 100 degrees to this pair of sides for this row, 100 degrees to, or 95 degrees to that row because there was a door in the way. Over here, that row was actually 30 to the back row. And you can't, we didn't put an angle over here. The main seating was this row, and that's about 15 degrees, plus and minus 15 degrees, which is 30 total. Okay. Let's see here. I think there's a side view. So this is the same room seen from the side, front row, back row. This was the quote unquote captain's seat. Wide speaker over here. At a point between the front, the side, and the back, you can sort of draw a line right through those. Side left 1, side left 2, top speakers. This particular room actually had an exposed projector. We chose a projector with really low noise and spun it down in terms of its bulb so that the fan was really slow. Sure. The projector had plenty of lumens, and the room is dark and the screen not that big, so we can actually run an eco mode. I don't like doing that. I'd much prefer to always enclose a projector because you really don't want any noise, but in this case, the projector contributed about 5 decibels of noise over the ambient noise of the room, so that was okay. So this is showing the subwoofer. This room sounded great, worked great, really simple. All right, switching gears. A room it's funny, and on the diagram here, it seems like it's the same size, except that now we got 6 rows of seats, obviously a way bigger room, okay? So this is a room that's about 32 feet, if I remember right. Mostly triad. Oh no, I'm sorry. So this room, actually the three front speakers. I'm having a memory failure. Yeah, so it's actually a combination. Let's go to the front room. No, I have it. So front speakers were actually Wisdom Audio. Sides were triads, a combination of stuff. But interesting in that the room is all stretch fabric all the way around. Three front speakers. The left and rights were outside the screen. The screen wasn't really that big. They're mounted in bafflettes, small baffle sections that were turned into a combination of actual 2-pi baffles and base absorbers. One of the questions from last week was, can you make this into a base absorber? Well, yeah, if you actually stuff it correctly with the insulation, it does end up absorbing base. It comes down the side. Wide channel speaker here, first side, second side, back channel, spaced further apart than I like to do it, but there's this thing they had in this room called a window. Can you believe they put a window in the back of it, right?
Why would they do
window,
that?
I don't know. The window did have a blackout shade, but it was there and we couldn't put a speaker in the window, so they're spaced a little far apart. And then Atmos, the top Atmos speakers over here, which in the case of this room actually were invisible loudspeakers. So the ceiling was all appeared like sheetrock, was all plaster with invisible speakers in them. And if you treat those correctly and equalize them and don't ask them to play a lot of bass, you know, I think I let them play down to 150 hertz and then let the low frequency be taken over by the subwoofers, put limiters on them and equalize them. The room worked great without any evidence of seeing a speaker up there. So that's the same room seen from the side. Subwoofers were actually 4 JL Audio IWSs hidden behind the stretch fabric. These 4 guys that are really kick-ass subwoofers with a 13.5-inch driver, and we tend to drive them from an external amp, give them typically about between 800 watts and 1,000 watts each. Each one of them play stupid loud in a form factor that's only 4 inches deep, tall, but very, very shallow. In this room, again, we're using bipole speakers, okay? So interestingly enough, it's a pretty big room, but we wanted to have good coverage of the surround sound field and of the wide channels, and we chose something that had really wide dispersion, which is these bipole speakers. These are triad gold surround dipole. They exist in both dipole and bipole. When you place the order, you have to make sure you tell them in your purchase order which one you're getting. Projector, by the way, in an enclosure so that the noise of the projector was inaudible in the room. Oh, this room was actually cool in that it had 2 projectors. I'm going off course over here, but I do want to bring that up. So the room is used for a few applications, of course, cinema, gaming, and teleconferencing. And for gaming and teleconferencing, that projector is not used, and instead this smaller, slightly lower performance projector is used, but it allows you to stand over here and not get in the way of the beam. So this is a projector with a really wide angle beam placed in the front of the room and hidden in a motorized lift. This is the same room. Sorry, so this is a room without the treatments, and then there's a whole treatment package that includes diffusers towards the front with absorbers. These are Hemi disc diffusers that take the sound that hits them and scatters them out into 2-dimensional plane. And over here we have hemisphere diffusers that take the sound and scatter it into a 3-dimensional hemispherical plane. A bit of absorption, never too much, just not much more than 10 to 15%. And there you can see all the speakers. This represents the grid that's mounted on the wall that spaces the stretch fabric in front of the speakers. So this is the lightweight framing scheme that's built in front of the sheetrock to hold up the stretch fabric track.
Is that normally wood or aluminum things, or?
Wood. Usually it's a combination of elements. I have slides later that show that, but it's a backplate usually made out of 3/4 ply, some kickers on about 2 to 3 feet spacing that go out typically about 3 or 4 inches, and then the front plate is 1/2 inch or 3/4 ply, about 4 inches wide, and you build basically this network of these what looks like ladders really, and on the front face of that you apply the stretch fabric track, and then you stretch a fabric in front of all of the speakers and treatments.
Nice. Sam asks, in a 2-tier system where you have 2 rows of seats that are different heights, where do you position the tweeters of the fronts, and Oh, hang on, let me reread this. Where do you
Yeah,
position the tweeters of the fronts in the center of the difference between two ear heights? So I think he's
yeah.
asking about the position of the tweeter of the front speakers if the two rows are different heights.
Well, the two rows are going to be at different heights, otherwise there's no point in having a tier. And that's an amazing question. And I wish I had 2 hours to talk about it. Really quickly, what I like to do, if it depends on the speaker. So this is a line array speaker, which means that it produces largely a cylindrical wavefront. And if you were to raise that speaker up any more than this, it would put it above the seated ear height of the front row, and it would sound bad. And in most line sources, you want to stay away from the bottom 6 inches of the speaker. That's where the sound starts to actually get a little funky. So in this particular case, that listener is hearing the straight on axis orthogonal sound field from the speaker. So their sensation here is that the sound's coming from here. The
Right.
back row, the sensation is the sound is coming from there. So you have a slight difference in where the imaging height is with line sources, depending on where you sit. So with a regular point source speaker, one that kind of radiates out that way, with or without a waveguide or a horn, I tend to like them putting them up a little bit higher and at about the seated ear height of the back row, or maybe a tiny bit higher so you can get closer to the middle of the screen. If you have a speaker with vertical directivity, you can actually take advantage of that and raise the speaker up a little bit more so that the front row is slightly off axis of the main mid-range and tweeter, and therefore quieter, and that quieter is compensated compared to the back row by being closer. And so you can actually, if you're lucky and you time all this correctly and align it all correctly, you can have the same sound pressure level at the front and back row. And with a point source speaker, with or without a horn in it, the sensation of the sound is the same at all heights. So we have a session coming up where I'm going to talk about speaker placement, more about that in a different context. But that's about all that I want to say here, or else we're going to completely run out of time. That is a great question. And when we place speakers in our designs, we spend probably about 2 hours obsessing over the radiation pattern, the lobing, the interactions between the speaker and the bass character in the room, and where it is that you're going to get to a point where the directivity helps in having less difference of sound between the two rows. So it's a bit of a complicated science. Okay, this is the ceiling layout in this same room. This like little dotted area represents the, actually in the case of this room, it was what's called a basophone ceiling, which is an absorptive ceiling made out of a plaster that hides absorptive material. And then these are the 4 quote unquote invisible speakers hidden behind the plaster. And this over here represents the drop down projector for the non-cinematic applications where you can actually stand in the middle of the room and not get in the way of the image. So this is interesting because this goes it goes outside the box. First of all, the ceiling is not stretch fabric. It's not regular sheetrock. It's this acoustical plaster, which is kind of porous and lets sound through to absorptive layers behind it. If you do it all absorptive, it's too much absorption, so we tend to occlude some parts of it. There's about 4 vendors that do this. Basophone was sort of the first one, but there's also a company called Fellert. There's a company out of Holland called Asona. And then there is a company out of New York called Pyrock. So there's 4 different vendors of those kinds of materials. It's a good way to do a ceiling that looks like nothing acoustic is going on, but it's actually absorptive. So in that ceiling, a bit of the plaster is that acoustical plaster is covering the invisible speakers, and you walk in this room and it just looks like a regular room with nothing special going on. And
wow, that's cool.
You light it up, boom. So switching gears. So this is a big dedicated theater, 3 rows, in which this is also an early implementation. So in the 3 rows, again, you're going to see the 3 front speakers in their bafflettes, their baffle sections. The baffle sections are all sort of concave. The left and rights are aimed in. They're all behind an acoustically transparent screen. Front row is at a 62-degree angle from the left and right speakers. The middle row is at 37 degrees. The back row is at 30. We actually wanted to go a little wider, but the sizing of the room didn't really, some construction elements in the room didn't allow us to go there. This is the wide left and wide right speakers. Notice they're canted in. Side left speaker, 2 sets of them, and then back speakers all the way in the back of the room. This room is interesting in that there's 2 rows of seating and a bar row, and then this over here, which is, you go, what is this? Well, there's a gym over here, there's another playroom over here, and this is the main entrance. So we needed to preserve walkway space behind here, and that essentially drove the layout and architecture of the space. This is all stretch fabric, this line over here. This is screen, stretch fabric. So everything is hidden away. And that's all I'm going to say about this one.
Do you, Anthony, do you find that in a lot of systems that you build at this level, at least, people do want something more aesthetically pleasing versus a geek like me who likes to see all the speakers and stuff? What do you say that mix is like?
Yeah, absolutely. The house that this is built to, the whole, you know, if you walk around the house, it's a big 30,000 square foot house on the coast in Orange County in California. Everything is superb. Everything is beautiful. The finish is amazing. You can't walk into a room and see a bunch of speakers and acoustical treatments and wires. That would just be completely inappropriate. So the finish in the majority of these upper end rooms we do is all stretch fabric. The fabric itself is acoustically transparent. It's selected to be kind of like grail cloth. It doesn't occlude the sound, but it hides everything. Philosophically, I also like to hide the gear because when you walk in the room and you see speakers, it tells your unconscious, oh yeah, I'm in a technical space.
Right.
You walk in a room and the only window into the story is the screen. You forget all about the sound, and it's easier to just get lost into the story of the screen. And I just prefer that.
Yeah, cool.
So
it doesn't seem like, especially when you're at this level building rooms like this, just to go ahead and do a stretch fabric. I mean, you're already going this far. You might as well take that extra step.
Yeah, no, that's what you got to do. And the budget for doing all the stretch fabric typically in a room like this is going to add maybe $40,000 or $50,000 to a room that's hundreds of thousands of dollars between construction, decor, and speakers and projectors. So it's a small part of the budget.
Small percentage, yeah. It
makes a very big difference aesthetically. I do want to point out that in this room, we are using bipole speakers on the ceiling. So again, that question that came along is like, yeah, I'm going to talk about it. Bipole speakers correctly placed, bipole speakers over here, even though it's a pretty big room, it all works well if you tune them correctly and aim them correctly and all of that stuff.
Right.
Now, let's switch gears to a much smaller room. So we're now getting away from the ideal. We have a couch very close to a back wall. It's a room that's square-ish, slightly wider than it is long. And so now what? So this is an Atmos room. 3 front speakers, left, center, right over here, wide channel over here, side channel over there, back channel over here. So this couch is not all the way up against the back wall. Visibly, it sort of seems like it is because there's a stretch fabric layer here that puts the back of the couch about 8 or 10 inches. But really, it's a relatively big couch, and the seating location, the distance between head and speakers is more like 20 inches, so there's a little bit of breathing space, but far from what you would call an ideal rectanguloid space. Pair of top speakers over here, not right overhead, but forward from there. We found that going directly overhead is actually rather annoying. You kind of want to look up and go, what is that?
Yeah.
Yep. So you put them forward, and interestingly enough, you still get the sensation that it's overhead, but it just complements what's going on in the frontal sound field much better. This particular room also has 4 subwoofers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, relatively shallow ones. And this room has actually all Guarani system speakers. The equipment rack is behind over there, all concealed.
Right.
Now, switching gears. Really different.
Whoa.
Really funky shape room. This funky shape is actually, some people go, oh, that's an acoustically perfect shape. It's odd.
It looks like it looks like an amphitheater or something.
It looks like an amphitheater.
Yeah.
It was forced this shape was forced by where this space was in the construction of the house. So this over here forms a corner bottom corner of the basement foundation of the house.
Mm-hmm.
This forms a footing in the middle of the house, this over here, that we can get around. But we managed to finagle something in here that would fit and would look good. It was actually made to look very, very antique. The look of it is actually of an old Spanish castle environment. So very old woods, old timbers, very, very cool.
Very
You
cool,
walk
man.
into the room back here. It was a CEDIA finalist a few years back. And you go, man, what do I do with this? Well, let's go over the speakers. Left, center, and right behind an acoustically transparent screen. These are Gramani Systems Alphas. Pair of wide speakers in orange over here. 2 sets of side speakers in blue, side right, side left. A pair of back speakers over here into, actually, and interestingly enough, an archway. There's actually a door. They were actually mounted into the door. That allows you to get back over here to where the subwoofers are hiding, and you can get in here to do maintenance on the projector. 6 top speakers, front pair, middle pair, back pair, all aimed towards the seating position. This particular speaker is one we make that has an angled baffle in it, so you turn it until the baffle aims at where it's got to aim. These are side views of all of the above. Front speakers, wide channel, side and back. I know it's a little hard to see all this, but very far from the rectangular spaces I've talked about so far.
John says that's reminiscent of 1990s recording studios. He calls it the Darth Vader mask shape. I haven't heard it called that before, but it's interesting. Yeah,
I call it the coffin shape. Guess what? A lot of recording studios are still being designed that way by engineers who are. I'm gonna say something really obnoxious. Still stuck in the 70s. Sorry. So there are some things from the 60s and 70s that are good. Guitars and guitar amps are still kind of stuck in that because they sounded great. Fine. I don't know, but there are theories of studio design that call for this coffin shape, and they actually have more problems than benefits. And I know people who've built those and hated the results, other people who love the results. But thanks for bringing that up. If you're designing a recording studio today, there is nothing wrong with making it a properly proportioned rectangle. Don't waste room and doing these odd shapes like that. It's just old approach, flat earth approach at things. All right.
Thomas has an interesting question, and we could address this later if it's not the right place for it. But it's an interesting question. I've heard some theories on this over the years. How much does it matter that the speaker wire length is exactly the same for the front, left, and right speakers?
Very, very, very little.
I've heard this before, so I'm curious to what you say.
So what happens in speaker wire, the core thing that speaker wire does is mainly add resistance between the amplifier and the speaker. It can add a little bit of inductance, very small amounts, but mainly resistance. If the difference, if a speaker has an average impedance of about 4 ohms, you would have to have 100 feet of wire before that wire has any effect on the sound of the speaker.
Right.
So if the difference between the left speaker and the right speaker is 100 feet of wire, you should be careful. And how would you do that? Well, if you had an amplifier sitting over here driving the right speaker, and the left speaker, the wire had to go all the way around, the basement and the attic and hit the left speaker, and it's 100 feet. Yeah, you're right. You shouldn't do that. If the difference is 5 or 10 feet, dude, you're not going to hear it.
Yeah.
I don't care how audiophile you want to get about it. I've done it. You can do blind A/B tests on that. It's not audible.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've basically heard that before. Unless you're going really long distances, it really doesn't matter. So I'm glad Thomas asked that. That's a cool question.
Now there is a condition in which you can have a secondary effect. It's called a side effect, just like in medication. You can take a drug that fixes your headache, but
your arm
makes
falls
you
off.
paraplegic. Your arm falls off. Sorry. So now you don't have a headache, but you don't have an arm. So there is a condition that, by the way, I could talk about this for an hour.
Yeah.
I will say there is a condition in which an amplifier to loudspeaker interaction can cause an oscillation in the amplifier. A loudspeaker is not a resistor. It is a combination of a resistor, an inductor, and a capacitor. And that tank circuit can actually cause the amplifier, when it's looking at that speaker, to oscillate, to become actually a 1 megahertz oscillator, or 500 kilohertz or 2 megahertz oscillator. And that is very visible if you put an oscilloscope right on the terminals, a high impedance probe oscilloscope on the terminals of the amplifier. You may see the amplifier just sitting there producing 1 megahertz with no signal.
Yeah.
And then you put 50 feet of speaker wire that has a little bit of resistance between the amplifier and the speaker, and that damps the oscillation. So suddenly, that speaker that's driven by 50 feet sounds a whole lot better than the speaker driven by 3 feet. Right? So at 3 feet, there's no significant resistance. The interaction between the speaker and the amp will be an oscillation potentially. And then you add a long resistance or change the type of wire that has a different resistance, and you get rid of the oscillation. That is not the wire. What you've just done is change the relationship between the amplifier and the wire, which has an effect on the sound. Absolutely, that's highly audible. But the wire is acting as a Band-Aid for a problem that's there between the amplifier and the speaker.
Right. Good.
So that does happen.
John says, and maybe Anthony, you could vouch for this. John says to pick up a book called Audio Video Cable Installer's Pocketbook by Stephen Lampin. Does that sound familiar?
I don't know that, but I'll certainly take a look.
I'll have to use the Google machine later and check it out. That's interesting.
All right, send me the link. Send the link to everybody. That sounds like a cool thing.
Absolutely.
All right, next room, another CD award-winning room. Look at this shape. It's totally weird.
That's so weird.
Whatever. Maybe we won the award that year because we found a way around a difficult architectural challenge. And I think the judges at CDA kind of like as much perfection as they go, wow, you were thrown a difficult challenge and you found a way around it. Fine. So the challenge is, this is an L-shaped room, okay? And that's what the client said here. You got to work with this. I want really good sound. I want it to be perfect. I would kick ass, but it's L-shaped and you got to work with it. It's like, any way to knock down this wall? No. Okay, any way to shorten this out so that it's not? No. Okay. You want to think about it? No. So what did we do with this? So first of all, and then they threw this design at us, which is a screening room. I won't mention any. Screening room of a famous director. They said, I want it to look like that. So this is the top view of the room. This is how we solved this challenge. There's a bump out here from a fireplace on the other side. There's this L-shaped. So we put the projector, we created a little cubby space over here for the projector and the equipment that's behind a sound isolated sliding door. And the 3 front speakers are mounted in small bafflettes that are treated behind with absorption so they become a bass absorber. There's a big screen over here placed in front of all of that, driven by a big Barco projector that's completely off center. Look at that. Well, this particular model has enough horizontal offset that you could actually light up the screen from whatever it is, however many, like 2 or 3 feet off axis. So 3 front speakers traditionally put in there, I mean, for our tradition, in baffles, aimed correctly at 57 degrees for the front row, 38 degrees for the middle row, 29 degrees for the back row. A wide channel speaker over here at this angle. This claims 32 degrees. Side channel here, another side channel over there. Ideally, we'd want those a little further back, but there's this thing called a door.
There's a door there.
To be there so people can get in and out of the room. Like, what an idea. Another wide channel on the other side, side. And then back channels. Where are we going to put the back channel? So we have a back channel here on the wall pointing here. And the other one is over here aimed back, trying to do the same thing so that the listening angle between here and that speaker ends up being the same. So you have to go further back. So if you imagine projecting that angle up 15 degrees at the back wall, let's say it's 5.5 feet off this surface, and as you keep going to the ceiling, you just place the speaker to where you're hitting that same angle. And it worked. Sounded just fine after like a longer calibration session where you have to get around the fact that things aren't in the right place and you can't just tune it by the instruments, but you got to do a little ear correction. Like, in the end, the client's like, oh my God, I love it.
If just to keep the number simple here, if it takes an hour, just say an hour to calibrate a normal room, how much longer did it take to do an oddly shaped room like this? Is that an extra 30 minutes?
This was 3 days of calibration, 3 days.
Nice.
At the end of the 3rd day, I was so burnt out that I backed my car into a lamppost. I was like,
oh no.
I couldn't see straight. Bam.
Your brain was just so fogged, I'm sure.
$3,000 of damage at 3 miles per hour.
Graphs and numbers, and just for 3 days straight. Yikes! I've done some pretty long, many hours doing some video work like that too, especially big church with 3 projectors or something. And I know the feeling, man. You come out of that at the end of the day, and your brain is just mush sometimes.
Yeah, it's thrashed.
And you're in this dark room all day, you haven't seen the sun.
I mean, and it's a lot of focus. You're really concentrated looking at this,
You're
listening,
very
looking,
focused.
adjusting. And it's just, it's like any kind of programming. It takes a lot of concentration, and you just zoned out
Sure.
after a while. So, top speakers in this room, I didn't mention those. This was a little bit later in our kind of career with immersive audio. You'll notice they are now at that midpoint between the left and center, a little forward in the listening position. You can't really see it over here, canted back. Jason, you had a question.
John, we talked about that book before. He provided a link to Amazon to that book, so I'm just going to share it with everybody.
Great. I don't know if in that book they will talk about these issues of resistance, inductance, capacitance. For the record, if you do 100 feet of 10 gauge speaker wire, like really big ass, there's enough inductance in 100 feet of that. That on most speakers where the tweeter goes pretty inductive at the higher frequencies, you will end up with a voltage divider at the high frequencies, so the speakers will go dull. Mm-hmm. It's complicated. It gets complicated. You got to be a little careful. Okay, so I did want to point out this is stretch fabric that's done in a particular way so that it's curving around. It's a little difficult to do that. It looks great. It works great. You just have to know how to do that. All right, switching gears. Another room. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of rapid firing through a bunch of different rooms so you can see how we've dealt with those over the years.
Anthony, if you could go back just for a second on that last room. Michael says, where's the halfway point null in this room? Taken from the furthest back wall or the L partition?
So that's a great question. Because the room has this weird shape, what would normally be a straight standing wave front to back is completely broken. And turns out that F. Alton Everest, in one of his recent editions of his book, does talk actually about what happens with the null over here. So if the wall was straight back here, okay, you would end up with a null right in the middle and one at a quarter and one, you know, at the first harmonic, second quarter would be a quarter, etc. What turns out by this L shape, the null actually bends this way. I'm going to try again to draw. Yeah, it never works when I try to do this because once I click this thing
with the little drawing tool,
then the screen gets in the way. The other, so I'm not seeing what I'm doing. Just give me a second. But the main standing wave takes a turn that way.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I can see it in the green line. Sure.
So I'm going to erase all those drawings and I'm going to go back to this thing. Okay, so. There it was. That's the story. So the standing wave actually bends around into a curve around the room for the first harmonic and the second harmonic and the third harmonic for the front. So it gets pretty complicated. Good question. And again, I could talk about that thing for hours. All right, a different room, 3-road room. A little bit too many seats for the size of this room, but that's what the client wanted. They wanted to be able to have a lot of people in here. The way we tackled this. So again, I'm going back to the thing so you can actually see a rendering of it. The way we tackled it. By the way, I also have high resolution pictures of all these rooms, but not going there. We can do that maybe at a different time. So this room has 3 speakers behind the screen. The left and right pair are forming a 55-degree angle to the front row, 37 to the middle row, 29 to the back row. And that works fine, works great. These happen to be a set of our beta speakers, the Grammy Systems betas. Wide channel here, forming a 42-degree angle to that middle row. The captain's seat was up here. 2 sets of sides, 1 pair here, 1 pair there. And the captain's seat is actually offset because this is a even number of seats. And everything was set up with time alignment so that even when you're sitting over here, the imaging is right there, which means just delaying that speaker by enough milliseconds, about 3/4 of a millisecond, so that the image that would otherwise be bent towards the left of the room is actually compensated over. You can do that with all the digital delay that's available in EQs and surround decoders. Back channel pair over here forms a 29-degree to the captain's seat. And there's 4 subwoofers that are shown here, 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 and here. And there it is. Top channels over here. This was done in a time where 6 channels of top energy or top decoding was just not available from anybody. So we went for 4 channels there on that halfway point between the left and center and right. Okay, ready? Weird rooms. This is what Jason wanted to hear 2 weeks ago at the first minute when we started this. I'm finally getting it to it, 2 hours into the second session. You guys still with me?
Yeah, there's still plenty of people hanging out. Yeah, let's keep banging through it. This is good. All excellent stuff.
I'm really honored that you're giving me this much time. It's really amazing.
Mike said that room that we just looked at before with the L, he said that's actually a very common example of rooms that he sees. I'm sorry, one more room back. Yeah, he was saying that he sees rooms like this all the time. So he was the one who asked about that null. Where does it go?
Thank you, Michael. That's a good one. Yeah. All right.
Good.
So first, I'm going to go back again into the non-weird room. As a reminder, this is what you do in a regular rectanguloid room, right? This is everything we talked about. Speakers are, their seats are at 0.68. The screen is 0.9 of the width of the room. The left and right speakers are at 45 degrees. The sides are at 100. The wides are at 45. The backs are at 165. Now, let's take that idealized condition, and this is why I spent so much time on this, is I want to drill home what is the absolutely idealized condition. And by the way, I encourage you guys to talk with your clients when they throw an L-shaped room or something else. Like, I want to make sure that we're all clear, the whole team here, the architect, the designer, the builder, everybody, the client, that ideally we'd prefer this. I know that that's not what we're starting with. Is there any way we can go back to this? And they go, oh, you mean you don't want an L-shaped room? No, I'd rather have something else. Can we do it? Yeah, sure. If you don't ask, you're not going to get it, right? So let's look at what happens when we get that proverbial L-shaped room. And L-shaped rooms can be bent in both directions. Here, I'm turning it around the other way. So what I've done for Michael is I've said, okay, what happens if the room goes out that way? Maybe there's a door here, maybe there's, I don't know where the door is. But so first of all, not a lot changes in the main and most important channels. I do want to point out that the most important channel is this one, the center, I have in green. By the way, in all of my color coding, when I do cabling and drawings, I always use right for red because that's what it always is in 2-channel stereo.
Sure.
I use blue for the left and green for the center. Why? Because we're in the world of audio video, and I remember RGB.
Red, green, blue.
RGB. That's my color code. It was actually the THX color code from 25, 30 years ago in the cabling world over there. That's where that comes from.
Sure.
So this is the most important speaker. Don't forget that. So don't be obsessing about what's happening over here with the surround channel in the backs too much, because ultimately when the client says, I love it, it sounds great, what they're listening to is mostly this and what's coming out of the subwoofer. Okay, that is more of the contributor to I love the sound than just about anything else. Okay, so that being said, that L shape is not going to change what's happening out of the center speaker or the left or the right, or barely. Okay, it is going to change where you're putting your side left speaker. So your side right speaker could stay on the wall over here. Where's the side left speaker? There's no wall anymore. So what I'm suggesting to do is the same thing as we did in that other room with the back speaker. I'm saying you're sitting over here, you're looking up at a certain angle to the right speaker, ideally about 15 degrees. Well, when you look up in the other direction at the left speaker and you project that angle all the way to the ceiling, that's probably where you want to put a speaker on the ceiling. It angled towards the seating position. So choose a speaker that you can either aim or one that's already pre-angled, and fire that at the listening position. So if I actually had this drawing as an elevation, you would see that the angle from the head to the 2 speakers would be the same. It's just that one goes all the way to the ceiling,
further away.
The other one's. So is it absolutely identical? No. When you listen to pink noise in one and the other, will you notice it's different? Yes. In the middle of a movie, when there's stuff going on everywhere, cannonballs are going here, people are yelling, horses are going on, music's going on, boom, bam. Can you tell the difference?
Doesn't matter.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. Is the client going to go, oh my God, this sucks, I wish I'd never done this? No.
No way.
So first thing is place that left speaker angle to the listener at about 100 degrees from your seating position from front to back, and up far enough away that it matches about the same angle, and hope that they can let you put something over there. Next thing is, what about our subwoofers? So originally we had a subwoofer in this corner in the target room. I'll go back over here. So originally we have 4 subwoofers in the 4 corners, thanks to the good work of Todd Welty. Where do we put this one? Well, I suggest try putting it all the way in that corner and time aligning it, like somebody had asked, with digital delay, see if that works. That sometimes works. I found that sometimes not to work so well. Sometimes it worked better to bring it back in, sometimes better to put it over here. It's a really complicated interaction between the standing wave character of this room, like I showed before, where it bends around, and where the subwoofer wants to go. So you're going to have to plan on experimenting. If you could actually put a subwoofer over here, it won't be broken. As long as you can, and if additionally you can actually tune it with individual EQ, it will be just fine. Okay, so this that looks like a complete nightmare, it's fine. Preserve the 45 degrees over here, 100 degrees to both speakers, 45 to the wide left, 65 to the backs, you'll be fine. Now, let's talk about another pain, which happens a lot, is a room that has an open arch on the left. So this happens a lot. You've got a room where in this direction, I'm not continuing the architecture, but in this direction you may have something that goes into a dining room, kitchen. Yep.
This is my living room right here.
Oh, excellent.
This open space to the left is my kitchen. This is almost identical to my living room. That's funny.
Right. So this is why Jason talked about this, 8 hours ago.
Yeah. I was just trying to find out what to do in my room.
He's got a selfish need. So done this many times, and it's a lot of the same things I just talked about. Just move that speaker out into the ceiling of the other space and try to preserve the same angle. Chances are it'll all work great. What else can I say? So that's it. That speaker's still at 100 degrees from your seating position. Now, what about what we had before in the L-shaped room, which was a place to put the wide speakers? What do we do now?
Don't mind the dog. I think the mailman's here. You can probably hear my dog barking in the background. Sorry for that.
Jason's marketing director has an objection with this.
Yeah. Novi. Okay.
So now where do we put the wide speakers? So we originally had them here at 45. Now suddenly there's a hole there. Do we put one on the ceiling and one on the wall? I tried that. Doesn't really work so well. That wide speaker really wants to take the azimuth, that position of what's happening over here, widening it out into the sound field up to the surrounds. So generally speaking, I would recommend just omitting the wide speakers. You can try. Jason, I'd love to hear how it works for you, since it's your own place. You can try putting the speaker there and light it up, don't light it up, see if it works. But generally, I found it not to work so well. I would just omit it. And then keep the subwoofers in the 4 corners. Now, the standing wave character in this room from front to back may be the same as when the room was closed in the idealized room. Certainly in this direction, it's a totally different story. So it's a crapshoot whether these 4 are going to produce that idealized pressure cancellation that Todd Welty talked about. You may as well try it. Okay, you may as well try it. You can also try taking those out and putting them all the way over here and tuning them for time alignment. It's really hard to know until you try it. So preserve the 45 degrees over here, keep that at 100 degrees, keep that at 165 degrees. All right, next weird thing, and I see this a lot, is a room in which the listening is all the way on one side. Maybe there's a dining room over here. Maybe there's a play area over here, whatever, but I've seen this a lot. Couch, so I'm calling this no left wall and a couch on the back wall. Happens a lot. What do you do here? The left, and by the way, everything I've shown here is over in the left direction. If it's in the right direction, I think you guys can understand that it's all the same story, right?
Yeah, just mirror it, yeah.
So left speaker in the ceiling, same thing. You're going to move it further away so that the angle over in that direction is the same as the one to the right, the side right speaker at about 15 degrees. You're going to put the subwoofers into the 4 corners over there. Oh, I'm sorry. No wide speakers. Where are you going to put them? Do you put a wide speaker here and one on the ceiling? I haven't found that to work very well.
Yeah.
You're so close to the back wall, so maybe no back speakers if the couch is pushed all the way up there. You can try one dipole speaker behind you. I usually feel like you need a little bit of room. So if you can convince the client to move the couch forward 12 or 18 inches, you can try that and see how well that works. And then the 4 subwoofers in the 4 corners with separate delay, separate time alignment, and all of that. Wow, where is, I'm not seeing, is there, okay. So what I forgot to mention is in this room, you're not going to do 4 sets of top speakers, okay? Only two top speakers, top left, top right, in front of the seating position, about 20 degrees, nothing in the back, because that thing in the back would just not work. It would be confused with the surround sound field. All right, here's another one. No left wall, big room, room to the back, but the whole right is a window.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've seen this a lot. We've done this very, very often, and now you're reverting to putting things in the ceiling. So in this type of room, we're going to put the side speakers in the ceiling. You can't put a side speaker on the glass. They're not going to let you do that because there's a beautiful view on the ocean or on downtown Chicago, whatever. So you are going to have to put the side speakers on the ceiling. You are going to have to put them at about 100 degrees and put them as far from you as you can so that they have that 15-degree angle between the seating position and the speaker. And on this side, it's going to be a compromise because that's going to be much more than that. And as long as you explain to the client, you got to understand that that's not going to be ideal. As long as you get it and you actually as long as you set the expectation right, and you document it in an email or a letter to the client going, look, we're going to do the best we can given the conditions here that are not ideal. They can't come after you later and go, this isn't working as well as it worked before when I had a dedicated room. Well, yeah, you don't have a dedicated room. So where are you going to put white speakers over here? I suggest not even trying. In a room like this where you're starting to put the side speakers on the ceiling, if you tried to do 4 top speakers, we have the front pair here and the back pair here, you're going to end up with so much sound coming from the ceiling, it's going to get amorphous. Sound will go there. An amplifier will feed signal down a speaker wire and light up a speaker, but in terms of an experience, it's just not going to, you're just going to go, why did I bother? Mm-hmm. So now here's a funny one. You can go ahead and put the 4 subwoofers in the ceiling. At about the quarter points, forgot to write that down here, at about 20 to 25% in from those points over here. You can try putting the subwoofers here or further in. You definitely want to time align them by having 4 different channels of EQ, and you can tune it to where the time alignment of the subwoofer gives a constructive energy summation right over here. That can work great. We've done rooms like this before. In the end, the client's perfectly happy. The dialogue clarity is good. The separation between left, center, and right is good. The bass is good and thumpy and strong, and the sensation of surround and top and immersion's there. That's really all that the client wants. And if you could instantly transport yourself from this kind of room to a properly done rectangular room with everything done, by the book, yeah, it would sound different. If you could actually get one of those transporter gizmos that they had in Star Trek and go, transport me, beam me up to the other room, yeah, you would hear a difference and the other one would sound better. But in the context of what's here and the architecture of it, the design of it, the layout, this can work fine and your client will be happy. Don't fret.
Anthony, in this case, the room we're looking at right now, let's say that left side is like a kitchen, almost like in my situation. Michael asks, how would you acoustically treat this room? What if the kitchen was on the left and that's very echoey? Do you do more absorption in the listening area to balance out the echo over here?
It's funny. You can absorb all you want over here. You're going to hear the reverb coming from that side of the room. And in fact, the more you absorb here, the more you're going to notice that there's reverb from over there. So be careful.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah.
So what do? Well, I have on some projects actually convinced a client to do a drape over here.
Yes.
And not for the purpose of blocking the sound, because you can't unless the drape is super heavy material. You won't produce very good sound isolation. It's just for reducing the amount of energy that's going out that way.
That goes over there. Yep, totally.
And maybe you don't need to drape the whole area, just curtain up a little bit. It can help a little bit. That's one way to do it. The other thing you can do is try to do some stuff in the kitchen to try to absorb that. So maybe you can put some panels on the ceiling. Yeah, maybe you can create some of the walls in the kitchen to try to do something over there. That's a good question. Thanks. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, good.
Okay.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned the drape because I've actually considered that in my own living room. I've looked at that room before and been like, what if I put a big drape just across here and block out the kitchen?
Yep.
So that's interesting you said that. That's cool.
So we actually have developed and make a drape that we call Eclipse within what's called a Dimension 4 line of acoustical treatments.
Nice.
And it's an interesting thing. It's a drape it's an expensive and heavy composite that's from inside to outside is the shear layer that you look at. It's a material that's acoustically transparent. Then there's strips of what's called waffle bump in drape making. It's a very thick flannel. But there are strips where there may be 3 inches of them, then there's a gap, and then 3 inches of this heavy flannel, and there's a gap. Behind that is a relatively heavy vinyl-based blackout. And then at the back of that whole thing is the other side layer, which is either white or black or something else you're looking at. And we've done drapes like that in environments like this where you actually pull the whole thing along the way. It's heavy, it's expensive because it's a custom-made drape. If you guys have ever looked into the price of custom drapery, it's insanely expensive. And when you look at how long it takes to do it, you'll understand why people charge that much money. But that drape is built in a way that it's not all absorption. I'm not a big fan of absorbing a full wall. It just sounds weird to the brain. Goes, where's my reflection? So, sounds dead. By doing that, you actually can have, but when the drape is up, you have sections of absorption and then sections of curved reflection by using the heavy vinyl blackout that diffuses the energy back to you, and sections of absorption, sections of diffusion. So that's called an eclipse drape. If you guys are interested in getting those, email me. I can get you a quote. You can try to make them yourselves, but be prepared for the fact that you're probably going to have to take 3 or 4 times until you do it right, because it's not easy to do.
It doesn't sound easy. Yeah, exactly.
It's not. The sections of waffle bump binding on each other and they bend around, and there's a certain way you have to make it so that it works.
Sure.
Out. But that's the warning about drapes. If you put too much of it all in one place, it's too absorptive and it doesn't end up sounding very good. Okay, I am going to end this session with a conclusion. This stuff's complicated. Speaker placement is not as easy as just going, I'm going to put these speakers over here. There's a lot of stuff to think about. You've got now 4 hours of YouTube you can watch on those, long days. You got to pay attention to a lot of details all simultaneously. You'll notice that the decision about where to put this depends on that and this and that and this, and everything influences everything else, and you got to be aware of that. I hope you enjoyed all of this nonsense. And, thank you. Thanks for your time. If you need to reach me, here's my contact. And I look forward to doing more of this fun stuff.
Yeah.
I will mention that I have 200 pages of plan sets that are similar thing that I just showed here, just a few of them. Much later in time, much later. If people want it, I'm more than happy to spend a whole hour just doing a page turn session where I just go click, 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 and show you how we've dealt with problems. I'm only showing the ones that were a successful outcome. We've made mistakes. We've done things on paper. We go, oh, this is going to work, and then you build a room. You're like, oops.
Wait a second.
And then you pay for the mistake. You actually fix it.
Yeah.
And then you learn for the next time. So the plan sets I would show are all the ones that were successful, and they're just good examples.
That's good. And guys, if you have any specific topics or talking points that you'd like Anthony to kind of touch on, feel free to send those ideas to us, guys. We want to do these to be educational for you. So if there's any specific topics or anything that you want to cover, shoot me or shoot Anthony an email. We tend to schedule these things a couple of weeks out, so we have plenty of time to come up with different topics and whatnot. So don't be shy with those types of things. John suggested that we do a whole day long one with some breaks. Maybe like a full day of trading.
I'm gonna be so tired. I'll back my car into another lamppost.
Yeah, you'll hit another pole. Yeah. So guys, we answered most of the questions throughout the presentation. So thank you guys for putting those questions in. There were a few questions though that I think were a little more appropriate and easier to actually answer sort of offline. So if I didn't answer your question, or if I didn't ask it to Anthony, guys, I'm not ignoring you. I just wanted to save that for sort of an offline conversation. It just seems more appropriate. So guys, thank you so much. A long session today, but very, very, very good information. I'm learning just more and more of these myself, Anthony, as we go along. As I mentioned to you before, I'm definitely a video guy, kind of professionally, but my heart's really with audio. So I love that we're doing this. And for you guys who are listening, thank you so much for your time. And stay tuned. Next Monday, we'll continue on with some more audio with Anthony. Anthony,
what are we doing next Monday? What's the topic?
I have to look at the topics. I forget. We had so many. Let me see if I have that one in my calendar.
I think it was all about subwoofers, if I remember right, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's right. The big topic that I've always been interested in is just bass in general. You know, especially coming from a little bit of a car audio background that I have. Learning about bass and stuff is also cool. Jermaine says, where do you get the YouTube videos? Jermaine, if you go to the Meridio YouTube page, you'll see all the videos that we've been doing in the past couple of months. So feel free to check out the Meridio YouTube page. Also some stuff on AV Pro Edge YouTube as well. So Anthony, thank you so much again. Any parting words for everybody?
Jason, thanks again. I had a good time, 2 hours of this stuff, and I'm still energized. I want to again thank AV Pro Edge for sponsoring this, putting up the time, energy, bandwidth, and organization of this. It's very altruistic of you guys. Although I now know that really Jason just wanted to know what to do with his listening room.
Yes. Exactly.
You could have just asked 8 hours ago. I would have told you. Thanks again. I'm glad you guys hung with this for such a long time. And you know, same place, same time next Monday.
Yeah, next Monday. Great. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week and be safe out there. We'll see you. See you next time.
All right.